welcome everybody. We're back with my good buddy David Patrick Harry, who is now Dr. David Patrick Harry. Don't you dare fail to leave out that PhD. He's got the ability to write dissertations. He can do surgeries. He's a doctor now. He can do it all. Just kidding. Congratulations, Dr. D.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate that. You know, it's been a long time in the making. And I remember talking to you back in like 2021, 22 about, and I changed my dissertation topic. So I had to basically restart after doing all the research to start on one, which is actually going to tie with today's stream, because initially I was going to do one on the history of psychedelic mysticism, which then got changed to transhumanism. So finally glad to be done with that, and pretty anxious to finally get that published and have an actual physical book to sell and go along with some of my research and work. So I appreciate the congratulations, and thanks for having me on it. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I caught the debate that you guys had as your sort of panel debate with your Gnostic dude, and I was just realizing how, like, it seems like Gnostics and cult leaders, like, they all kind of drift in the domain of looking more and more like Manson. They all kind of like take on a Manson vibe and aesthetic.
Yeah, he was convinced that, the whole rigmarole that Jesus was a mushroom, which comes out of Gianmarco Allegro's book. It's like The Sacred Mushroom. And
Funny you said that. I was going to ask you about Allegro, but we'll get to that here in a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll save it for when we get to it then.
Yeah. But well, before we get to all that, so you've had a pretty wild, exciting journey. I mean, you had, time that you spent overseas. You were in China for a long time. Did you get into a lot of, like, did you study kind of Eastern philosophy during that period in your life?
Yeah. During my undergrad, so I grew up kind of like conservative Methodist. And I remember I took a Bible course at my university during undergrad, and it was by a critical scholar who wasn't Christian. And so I was introduced like the multiple authorship theory of the Gospels and the syncretism between the Epic of Gilgamesh, and just totally annihilated this naive Methodist Christianity I grew up with. And so I took another course on Intro to World Religions and became really interested in Taoism, Buddhism specifically, but also Hinduism and just Eastern mysticism, generally speaking. And so I did 2 study abroad trips to southern China at Sun Yat-sen, Zhongshan Dashui, and Guangzhou. And that was really eye-opening, because Chinese culture is not the antiquated Confucian Taoist blend that most people think. I mean, they're very pragmatic, like capitalist oriented people. So they are not very much interested in some of that ancient history that I liked. But yeah, I spent 2 summers there and was really interested in the Eastern mystics. At that time, I was like getting into Alan Watts and that type of stuff, and thinking that this perennial spirituality somehow led to like ultimate universal truth. So yeah, that was go ahead.
No, I mean, I was just trying to refresh myself on, I know you spent time over there, and I remember you saying that when you came back, you realized like this wasn't really the mysticism that I expected it to be. The Chinese people weren't really that into it. That you said they were very pragmatic and basically kind of pretty much just capitalist for the most part, I guess. But how? And then you kind of got more into focusing academically on writing originally on shrooms, or you said you changed the original thesis. What did it change from to what?
So that was during undergrad, and I finished the capstone project was on theories of magic. So I was interested in the ways in which some of the founders of the field of religious studies began to categorize the difference between magic and religion and science. That was Fraser and Taylor and those types of guys, those early sociologists, Durkheim. And then during my master's degree, which was at the University of Illinois, I was deeply embedded into the psychonaut, psychedelic mysticism worldview. Terence McKenna, Timothy Leary, Robert Anton Wilson, all those same characters. And during the master's program, I worked with an early Christian scholar and focused on really Gnosticism and Hermeticism during the time of the first 300 years of Christianity, and looking at that cultural milieu. And then there was a Native American scholar, Dr. Treat, at the University of Illinois, And with him, I did a research project on like psychedelic shamanism. And at that time, I was completely convinced of this sort of perennial, hermetic, magical, psychedelic worldview. But that my time there, especially working with the early Christian scholar, is that he told me one time he spent like a whole year and a half writing an article. And I was asking him about it during office hours. He's like, yeah, I essentially write this. There's one other scholar in Europe, and they study the exact same thing. And he spends all this time to write articles. And essentially, it's just a handful of other academics around the world that are even engaging in that conversation. And I realized, damn, that your whole career is just doing research for like 3 or 4 other people to actually interpret and understand. I thought, man, I don't want to do any historical scholarship. It seems kind of boring. And so when I applied for the PhD program, initially I got accepted to study people who are spiritual but not religious and why they appropriate certain symbols. So anybody who's familiar with the rise of the nuns, None, that's not Nun. Those are people that when they fill out a Pew Research Center, like religious demographic in the United States, they fill out the very bottom selection, which is none of the above. And that incorporates atheists, agnostics, but mostly people who are spiritual, not religious, which is like 85% of that cohort. So the majority of the people who are nuns are actually people who identify as I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And I think it was 2018 that nun category became and they differentiate Protestantism from Catholicism, but it was like 38%, like the biggest single demographic in the Pew Research Center. And so it was a kind of a hot topic. That's why I got accepted for it. And during that period, I actually read this book right here, The Psychedelic Gospels, which is going to come up in our conversation. And actually, Dr. Jerry Brown was on my PhD committee. So the people that were on my PhD committee had very different, they weren't Orthodox Christians. They had different interpretations of stuff. But what his research did was basically show that these frescoes that arrive really from the late 900s and into the very early 1300s depicted like this weird mushroom relationship with Christ. And people during that time really began to argue based on John Marco Allegro and tying all this stuff. Well, look, this is evidence that Christianity used magic mushrooms. And at that time, I had a previous YouTube channel promoting psychedelics. And so I thought, oh, that's great. Well, even as a psychonaut, when I read the book and then did a research paper on that topic, I came to the conclusion that this really wasn't connected with historical Christianity. I wasn't even a Christian at the time. What it was tied to was the resurgence of a Gnostic heresy that came from the East and entered into southern France, the Cathars, the Albigensians. And so where they were finding a lot of this evidence, be it in Germany and France, northern Italy, and even places in Turkey, they were always around these sort of Gnostic heresies. So I wrote a paper not arguing that it was the historical Eucharist, but actually there were Gnostic practices. And that led to another research paper I wrote trying to look at Gnostic sects like the Carpocratians and the Borborites, who were actually engaging in explicit psychedelic inebriating use for these magical Gnostic initiation purposes. So from there, I thought, man, I bet, because I was familiar with at least Eastern Orthodoxy having icons, I thought, man, with all those icons, because when you look at some of the evidence here, it is sort of iconographic, if you will. Like this right here is a depiction of Adam and Eve at the bottom of the Jesse tree in Hildesheim, Germany. And clearly they're pulling these little white balls off and eating them, which again was insinuated by the author and other people that looked at it as some type of psychedelic Amanita muscaria use. So I thought, man, I wonder if Eastern Orthodoxy is going to have all this stuff. So I took a PhD course on the history and theology of the Orthodox Church. And that didn't, and so I was ingratiated to Orthodoxy from that. Definitely didn't find any of the mushrooms I found in these Cathar frescoes, but became aware of the worldview and the paradigm. I thought, wow, that.
Let me ask you a question. Hold on a second. Let me ask you a question. So just for my own interest and research, I remember encountering this idea probably around 2010, 11, 12 was the first time I heard this idea. Maybe a little bit earlier, maybe 2007 or 8. And I think it was like the early phases of like the Joe Rogan. Remember when Joe Rogan started out and he was doing podcasts on his couch, and and I remember them discussing this, John Allegro's book. And so, first question is Allegro the first one to posit this theory, or this other book that you're talking about? And second question, are they actually looking at frescoes that actually have mushrooms, or are they interpreting the frescoes to be mushrooms? But they're actually, you said they're Cathar frescoes. So what? How much of this? How much of it's bullshit? How much of it's real? Is what I'm trying to say.
Sure. So John Marco Allegro's book, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, is first. He worked on the Dead Sea Scrolls. He was one of the scholars,
Right.
and he was an expert in Semitic languages and Sumerian and stuff like that. Well, apparently there was some type of problem he had with some of the other scholars because they weren't presenting all the translations and stuff they had found. So he wrote this book arguing, based on linguistics and etymology, that Christianity emerges from a mushroom fertility cult, that Jesus Christ was not a historical person, that the name Jesus actually came from a Sumerian word for semen dripping mushroom, and that this was the sort of origins, and that because of the dogmatization of Christianity and the institutional forming of it, that they cleansed the inebriating Eucharist and made it essentially a sober symbol, as opposed to what the early Christians or some of the ancient period that they were engaging with. So that has been totally debunked at this point. That book is only regurgitated by the psychedelic psychonaut culture. I double checked today, just looking at like academia. I cannot find a single linguist, a single classicist, and these are atheist scholars. These aren't Christians, or a single religious studies scholar that still argues that John Marco Allegro's book has any validity to it.
Does Yeah, I knew it did. And I knew he was actually eventually sort of kicked out of academia because he had some other weird theories that he tried to push beyond just the mushroom thing. But that guy that you guys had on the stream, he was saying Christ is the mushroom is the flesh of Christ, or Christ is the flesh of God. Is that an Allegro idea?
That is an Allegro idea, yeah, and it's not. I mean, Gnostics were doing that, so we know for the fact that Carpocratians and the Borborites and some of these other groups, they were claiming the same thing. Now, Gnosticism is kind of a dubious term because there's so many different schools in the ancient period, and they're competing with each other. So the Valentinians and the Ophites or the Borborites, they're not friendly per se. They're actually competing for a sort of dominance on the Gnostic interpretation. So those things were occurring. They were using inebriating substances and claiming this was like the flesh of the gods, which is actually the title of one of McKenna's books, The Food of the Gods, which is getting back to psilocybin mushrooms.
That one I've read. Now, when you were showing those pictures, were you saying those were like frescoes and reliefs that were Cathari reliefs that had mushrooms, or
they're all in the area, yeah, where the Cathars were? And so like this one right here. This is the famous one in Plaincourt, France. This is the depiction of Adam and Eve, and it clearly looks like some type of a mushroom fresco. Now, the Plaincourt Chapel, if you look into it, was actually created by the Knights Hospitallers, which, according to at least my theory, is that many of these crusading groups, including the Knights Templars, kind of rediscovered these ancient Gnostic heresies when they got to the Holy Land, and they brought them back. So this, like, Plaincourt Chapel was built by the Hospitallers, and it has this really weird fresco. Now, no, it's not used anymore, but this fresco you can actually still go visit. Now, another church in France depicts, like, this is the entrance of Christ, like his entry into Jerusalem. And you can see all these guys holding what appear to be these red mushrooms, and like one's extending one out to Christ. And then if you follow that chapel around, you'll see here is this one is the purification of Isaiah's lips, where it looks like God's handing out a sort of mushroom cap. And then if you follow the chapel around at the top, then it gets to the towers of Jerusalem, and these guys look like they're cutting down mushrooms. And then at the very last depiction in the chapel is the Last Supper, and of course you see these same mushrooms then cut up and placed on the table here. So regarding how much of it is fake, how much of it is just pure interpretation, and how much is there actual evidence, I would argue for some of these churches, I mean, it's hard to come to a different conclusion. Now, some of this other stuff, like the Great Canterbury Psalter is used to argue like the creation of plants right here is fungi. Now, I've actually looked into that, and the way that they're presented as fungi is actually used in different iconography, and it's not trying to depict mushrooms. It's just a sort of aesthetic. But the Hildesheim Chapel, as I was talking to you about this one right here, on the front doors, Bishop Bernard, who was head of that parish in Germany, Hildesheim, Germany, the metal doors going into the church actually have anatomically correct psilocybin mushrooms of that area in Germany. So I think some of it is legitimate, that something was going on in the historical period of all this evidence. Some of it I think is dubious interpretation, claiming, oh, that's a mushroom right there. But it's all within, I can't find any evidence before like the late 900s, which is right around the time where these Gnostic groups, during the Byzantine period, they hated Gnostics. And so if you were in, like, say, Anatolia proper, you were either forced to recant your heresy and convert, or you had to get kicked out of the empire. And so tons of these Gnostic groups actually begin to move towards Armenia. And so you get like the Tondrakians and the Paulicians. And then from there, eventually they move to Bulgaria, where you get the Bogomils. And it's believed that the Cathars are a form of the Bogomils that moved then further into Western Europe. So the way I look at it is the historical progression is, around the Mediterranean area, Northern Africa, ancient period, and then it moves eastward, and then eventually through more persecution, it moves westward and ends in southern France, southern Germany, northern Italy, that type of area. And then during Pope Innocent III, you have the beginning of the Inquisition and the killing of the Albigensians for these heresies. And also the leaders of the Knights Templars, which eventually then go up to Scotland, where Robert the Bruce accepts all these Knights Templars. And according to their own legends, they are the founders of the Scottish Freemasonry, and that they then institute these ancient Gnostic rituals into Scottish Freemasonry. And that's also echoed by Albert Pike. So that's not me just making a theory. That's what these people actually claim. And I have this book, Alchemically Stoned, which is by P.D. Newman, who is a Freemason and is claiming the exact same thing, that Freemasonry is actually based off these ancient Gnostic inebriating rituals.
Yeah, for those that are interested in the medieval heresies, there's a really well-known scholarly text by Malcolm Lambert that some years back I read, and I took a whole bunch of notes on it. If you want a full sort of 3-hour walkthrough of that, you can find that on my channel. It's called Medieval Heresies, and we go through the Bogomils, we go through the history of the Cathari, all the way up to the Waldensians, and how that Gnostic trend actually ends up influencing a lot of Protestantism. But let's rewind a little bit, go back to the time of those many Gnostic sects that we were talking about. I remember reading some years ago Irenaeus's Against Heresies, and in the first few hundred pages he details dozens and dozens and dozens of varying Gnostic sects, all kind of competing, like you noted. And he does mention several of them, at least a few that I can recall. I remember one of them is a guy named Marcus, and Marcus had his own cult, and he was a ritual magician, and he was utilizing some form of consciousness-altering, inebriating substance. And Irenaeus talks about this. And when Jamie and I were on a journey to Las Vegas last year, on our own little esoteric journey to Vegas, we read on the way there and the way back the Cambridge Companion to Western Mysticism and Esotericism. And this isn't, I'm not trying to like stump you or quiz you or anything. I just want to get your take on something that I had not really seen before, which kind of seems like it would be obvious, and it's right up your alley. But the person that wrote the first chapter on the ancient mysteries goes into great detail discussing the Eleusinian mysteries and the Greek esoteric cults, maybe a little bit prior to the Gnostic era, the Mithra cult. And what the conclusion that this person came to was that most likely in the Eleusinian mysteries, and you may have a different view, I'm not sure, but that's what I want to ask you about it. This person argues that it's a death and resurrection journey of the soul sort of ritual that goes on when you're given the kykeon, which is a hallucinogenic drink, and then you sort of go through the Demeter Persephone underworld resurrection sort of rituals, and I think there's even like a crazy dance involved. Just wanted to know if you came across anything like that, or what do you think of the Kaikion?
No, I actually think that there is some legitimacy to the Kekion theory. And so what you're referring to, the book that founded this is called The Road to Eleusis, Unveiling the Secret of the Mysteries. And so R. Gordon Wasson, who will probably come up, he's famous for actually if you want to say rediscovering, but at least popularizing psilocybin mushrooms in 1957. He wrote an article in Life magazine. He did this shamanistic retreat with Maria Sabina, and he wrote about it. And this was kind of the first time, at least in the modern period in the West, where there was explicit discussion about these psychedelic mushrooms. He sends those mushrooms then to Albert Hofmann, who is the synthesizer of LSD in 1938, has his famous bicycle day, April, was it 19th, 1943, where he accidentally consumes it and then rides his bicycle home. And then Carl A.P. Ruck, who's a classicist, who all of his work is trying to validate even Christianity. His thing is trying to validate the legitimacy of psychedelic use in all this ancient period. He uses his skills as a classics scholar to do so. So this book argues that based on pottery that they found, that the Kekekion is some type of ergot fungus. And so ergot is a fungus that grows on barley and rye grain. And it's common again across Greece and where the Eleusinian mysteries took place. And as you said, that's where they talk about Persephone's quest. It's about Persephone's death and rebirth, going to Hades and coming back. It's believed that anybody who is a who's who in the ancient period participated in these mysteries, and they were taken into some type of enclosed, almost like a theater space.
Yeah,
they would consume the beverage. They would be revealed the mysteries, and then hours later they would leave, and then they would be initiated into this ancient mystery. I actually think that there's something legitimate about that. And ergot and ergamine, which is found in some of those potteries, is a precursor to LSD. So Albert Hofmann, who synthesizes the psilocybin mushrooms from Maria Sabina by way of R. Gordon Wasson, and discovered LSD about a little over 20 years previously, they start synthesizing various forms of ergamine and come to the conclusion that in a lab, at least, they could construct an LSD-like beverage through this. And so it's believed that they don't know the exact process, but somehow they would allow this ergot, and they would mix it with probably wine, and then some measure that we don't exactly know, they're able to take out the toxins, because there's actually quite a few toxins in the fungus. And then you could consume this beverage and get inebriated through this and get initiated into the mystery. So I actually think that there's something there. Now, I don't support some of the larger conclusions that these scholars have made, but I think it's the best explanation for what was going on in Eleusis, because it was some type of beverage. And I think that, at least through some of the chemistry that they've done, that's probably most likely of what they actually.
Well, probably you're tripping balls. They take you sort of underneath the temple or something, and then it's the book describes it as like, then they bring you out. The climax of the ritual is sort of like a light comes on, and then you see like the goddess. You see Isis or something,
yeah,
or Persephone. But it's funny you say that, because I just looked in the footnote of this guy's paper. And first footnote is R. Gordon Wasson and Albert Hofmann. The very book that you cited at the bottom is
right.
So yeah, you're absolutely right that's where they're pulling from. Did you, a little side note, did you know, or did you come across anything pointing out that according to John Marks in his book on the history of MK Ultra, that it was Gordon Wasson was funded by the Macy Foundation, and then that was kind of a original sort of MK Ultra CIA project?
There are some. I've looked into the R. Gordon Wasson connection. He was clearly funded by some of the major moguls at the time, and of course, he was working for JP Morgan.
He was a banker,
yeah, which makes it very strange that this high-level banker working for JP Morgan just sort of got contacted and told to go to this place and meet this shamanist in Mexico. And then him and his wife, Valentina, go and participate, and then kind of make it now known to the first time in the Western world about these ancient psychedelic mysteries through shamanic practices. I do think that there's something behind the funding, and they traveled all over the world. I mean, his big thing was trying to solve the Soma mystery, which is one of the gods in the Rig Veda. And Soma is mentioned over 100 times. It is a god that you consume. It strengthens you. It illuminates you. It gives you courage. Again, potentially a connection even back with the berserkers in Europe who took mushrooms because they felt like they were strengthened. They had courage and they could go fight in battle. But R. Gordon Wasson, along with Timothy Leary, I mean, Timothy Leary also made a comment that he was, you know, you got to pick teams like the Yankees or the Dodgers, and he chose the CIA. And so, so there is some real interesting, potentially nefarious connections with an MK Ultra. By the way, this is the interesting thing to your point. His article, R. Gordon Wasson's article about Maria Sabina, is in 1957, and we know that the MK Ultra project began in 1956. So, interesting little timeline there that MK Ultra begins a year before R. Gordon Wasson goes to Mexico and makes all this stuff famous.
Yeah, exactly. Do we know if there are any other, if we go further back, is there any evidence if we go back to like Babylon or Egypt, is there any evidence in those ancient cultures of something like a consciousness altering initiation?
Certainly there's scholarship arguing for that. There's different plants, cannabis, Haoma, Pergamon harmala, Amanita muscaria, psilocybin mushrooms. There's all these different plants that people have speculated. I've seen multiple scholars argue that ancient Egypt was participating in some of these inebriating rituals. I would assume Babylon has noted their occult and magical orientation and ritualistic framework for those practices. I would absolutely imagine they were. The earliest historical evidence that we have really comes out of the Indian subcontinent, as I said, through the Rig Veda and this whole Soma thing. And so Soma, which in Persian is known as Haoma, which Haoma is also another inebriating substance. After, hundreds of years pass by and Soma develops, in my estimation, my argument is it then is incorporated into these Mithraic rites. And so Mithra is not a huge, he's in the Rig Veda, but he's not a huge figure. And we really don't get these devotional cults until later. But Haoma wine drinking, like these inebriating wine beverages, we know that was being taken place during these Mithraic rituals. I've looked at evidence from some scholars arguing that also orgiastic activity, which is typically associated with like collective groups, inebriating experiences, they participate. And this was true for the Manichaeans. So we have descriptions from China that the Manichaeans went all the way to China, and they said they're constantly consuming mushrooms. They're debaucherous, filthy people. They don't shower enough, and that they participate in these weird sexual practices. This is according to Chinese sources.
So there was there was hippies back then.
Yeah, the Chinese were. Yeah, they're like, these Manichaeans are filthy.
Manichaean hippies trying to get the ancient Chinese to go to Grateful Dead concerts.
Pretty much. And so there's an article that I found, and this is the only scholar that I've seen make this connection. His name's Robert Bedrosian. He's an Armenian scholar, and he actually has a paper where he argues that Armenia is the key to solving the Soma mystery. And I have not seen anybody but him, and I haven't even seen other scholars pick up this article. But he argues that Armenia, being in that Caucasus region, before it converted to Christianity, was actually the mountains in Armenia were a fertile place for growing these Amanita muscaria, these red and white mushrooms that could be used ritualistically. He claims that the Mithraic rituals and some of the ancient mythology, the pre-Christian pagan mythology of Armenia, was deeply embedded within these psychedelic cults and these Mithraic cults and rituals. And he claims, he's got evidence, and he writes about this in his article, that the Persian elite, the Zoroastrians, were actually purchasing massive amounts of these mushrooms from Armenia to have for these ritualistic purposes, and that some of the elites of the Zoroastrian Persian society could consume these in a ritualistic manner every year, and that they were purchasing these from Armenia. And then he claims in his article that he's found the continuation of the preservation of these mushrooms all the way up to towards the end of the 20th century in Armenia. We already just mentioned that Armenia is an interesting place because that becomes a hotbed for some of these Gnostic heresies during the Byzantine period, because the Byzantines weren't having it. So you either had to convert or you're getting kicked out. And a lot of them went there. And it's that cultural milieu that then goes and infuses within the Bogomils in Bulgaria. So I think there's actually something really there, that Armenia is the sort of historical key that unlocks the Soma mystery that so many people have been trying to say what it is. Terence McKenna believed it was like the psilocybin mushrooms. R. Gordon Wasson argued that it was the Amanita muscaria mushroom. Others have argued it's actually cannabis. Others argue it's Pagamen harmala or Heoma. So we really don't know what it is. But according to Robert Bedrosian, he claims that it is psilocybin Amanita muscaria mushrooms, and that when the Mithraic cult was at its height in Armenia, that this infused their culture, and that they were actually providing these mushrooms and these rituals for the Persian elite.
Yeah, one thing, just a little bit of a shift of focus. I noticed as I read through this text from the Cambridge Companion on all the esoteric stuff, whether it's the ancient inebriating ritual cults, or whether it's the Gnostics, or whether it's even Greek philosophy at times. And then if you fast forward all the way up to modern Rosicrucian mysteries, or if you go all the way up into Gurdjieff and Blavatsky, there was a commonality in this book that I didn't expect, which was that the tendency in Western Hermeticism, even in the Middle Ages with some of the weirdos like Jacob Boehme and Gertrude the Great, some of these so-called mystics in the histrionic, crazy Roman Catholic sphere, they end up in the same revelation, which is that the meaning and the answer of all the mysteries is you are your own God, bro. And I'm not right. joking. That's like common throughout this book. It wasn't something I don't think that the authors planned. I just think that as they worked through these different traditions, there's this underlying tendency to basically come to the revelation that you're your own God, you determine your own reality. Even when we get into Carl Jung just basically thinks, as a Gnostic sort of Platonic figure, your subconscious is projecting your external reality. You're creating your own reality. Is that a feature that you see as well? Did you come across this kind of stuff? And does that maybe lead us into the transhumanist side of things?
I would certainly say what you picked up on that thread is absolutely the case after the ancient period. I would argue, at least from my reading of some of the ancients, I mean, even some of these Gnostic groups, they were on a path of deification from their perspective. I think they would be submissive to say that they're not God, or equate themselves in nature to God. But especially after the Renaissance, so much of everything that you mentioned, once we get Renaissance humanism and the Zohar, the Kabbalistic text of Judaism, that gets written in the 13th century in Spain. And that's during the Umayyad Caliphate, where they allowed the Jewish mystics, the Kabbalistic mystics, the Sufis, and then these Christian mystics to actually form what I would argue becomes the Zohar. And that's where you get Giovanni Pico della Mirandola and what they call Christian Kabbalah. And it sort of reinterprets man and his relationship to God. And that then becomes, I would say, the foundation for the Rosicrucians, Weishaupt and the Illuminati, eventually the speculative Freemasonry that emerges. So the worship of oneself, I think, is tied with this sort of general tendency as we move closer to modernity, and especially post the Enlightenment. Yeah, that's exactly every single psychedelic teacher or author that I've read believes that you're on a process to realize of your unity with collective consciousness or collective divinity, something abstract like that. That's the case with everyone that I've come across. So I would say that's sort of this residue of Renaissance humanism mixing with the Hermeticism and the Kabbalism and all these occult theories that emerge. So You got Paracelsus. He was this very famous alchemist. He's the inventor of laudanum, and so getting high on opium was part of his magical process. We know Henry Cornelius Agrippa, like a lot of these major magicians.
I've got Agrippa and Paracelsus over on the shelf. I was going to get those out, but what would you say is sort of the underlying feature of the Renaissance era magicians in Italy and other places in Europe, and then the rise of Rosicrucianism, is this focus inward towards man himself? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and it's tied with a millenarian expectation. I think Giacomo Fiore's dispensational tripartite understanding of history, I mean, that's going to connect with actually my research on transhumanism, but that millenarian ethos that somehow we're like moving towards collective utopia. I mean, that's what the Rosicrucians were. And you can't fully understand that milieu without understanding the impact of the Protestant Reformation, and that these Protestants in the North were seeking some sort of legitimacy against the Catholic Church. And that's why I always say the 16th century is like one of the most magical centuries in European history. And it's during this period where you get these Rosicrucian confessios and the Weishaupt and the Illuminati, John Dee, all these different figures, Paracelsus, Agrippa, all these different people are during the 16th century. And so Protestantism, when you look at somebody like Frederick the Elector Palatine, he was trying to incorporate Kabbalistic Hermeticism and the Rosicrucian ethos with a form of Protestantism. I mean, this is what is ended at the first battle of the 30 Years' War, when he's defeated at the Battle of White Mountain. So that whole ethos was tied with like this Protestant Christianity, which is less sacramental, combining it with like the sacramentality of ritualistic magic. Yeah. We're going to create this brotherhood, this utopian kingdom.
Well, a lot of the early first generation Rosicrucians were Lutherans, and they were in the spheres of the Lutheran Church. I think Johann Andre, who is believed to be one of the compilers of the Rosicrucian Manifesto or whatever, was a famous Lutheran. Other famous Lutherans were also in that sphere. Sometimes people sort of make the assumption that Luther's cross, the famous Luther rose, just happens to also be a Rosicrucian symbol.
Right.
I don't know that Luther himself was into Rosicrucianism. I think he predated that a little bit. However, there is evidence that Luther was influenced by the Theologia Germanica, which is another one of these mystical texts that tends to focus on sort of what you get in some of these medieval Latin, Roman Catholic mystical texts is basically the union with God is so intense, and it's almost because of absolute divine simplicity and other kind of weird esoteric ideas. Well, if I become one with God, truly, then I am God. And so in other words, because there's no essence center distinction, there's no uncreated grace, they don't maintain the creator-creature distinction. Absolute divine simplicity, if you don't believe in created grace, requires that you become the essence of God. So you become God. And you actually see that in the chapter in this text, for example, on Jacob Boehme and on Gertrude Bell, both of whom tended to say that basically in the mystical union, you actually become God. So they're throwing out sort of, needed theological nuances here. And basically just sort of falling into a kind of a apotheosis, which I know you've talked a lot about on your channel and probably in your thesis, where man just becomes his own God, not by grace, but by his own will, knowledge, gnosis, tech, etc. All these are different pathways to become your own God. One book I'm curious if you got a chance to look at or ever heard about was Michael Hoffman has a book called Occult Renaissance Church of Rome. Have you heard of that?
I have not. Let me pull that out.
It's really good. It's right up your alley. I mean, even though Hoffman ended up, I think he's still a trad cat or something, but as Orthodox, we would actually pretty much agree with his critique of the Renaissance era papacy, because he's basically just arguing that as a trad cat, he's trying to make sense of Rome and what happened, and he basically ends up reading all the way back into the Renaissance papacy and saying, here's where things take a noticeable change. Even though Hoffman doesn't know a whole lot about the first 1,000 years of Christianity, he's accurate, I think, in pinpointing the turn towards the esoteric in the Medici Renaissance era papacy, which is definitely what happened, and hence why they promoted and they love the idea of magic, Christian Kabbalah, etc. That was all super popular at that time. And I think that's part of the influence and trek of Western civilization, at least Europe in the second millennium, the papal Europe.
Right. And to your point about this, the absolute divine simplicity being a type of presuppositional framework for this form of mysticism, I mean, all of this magical stuff is tied with Neoplatonism. And so this privileging of monism is essential. And then once you incorporate inebriating substances, now people can go from a rational articulation of Neoplatonic values and monism to a phenomenological experiential union with like divinity or something. And I think both those together are a huge catalyst. I mean, Terence McKenna is famous for saying, psychedelics dissolve boundaries. Yeah, I would agree with him. That's exactly what they do. That's not necessarily a great thing for him. This is how we dissolve the deleterious framework of history, so we can return back to the archaic goddess. And we can talk about the archaic revival. I think actually, given the trends in culture with the LGBTQ and the whole Skittles community and what they're doing, it kind of does feel like we're returning back to a pre-Christian period. And that, Marshall McLuhan's theories about the global village and how digital technology was going to actually take us from the literate man back to a primitive style culture. It's like, wow, I think there's some validity there, because it feels like that's where we're going, is that people are becoming less literate, more impulsive, and in a sense becoming more iconic to
savages, just making people into savages.
Yeah. So I think all those things are working together.
So here's a question I have, something I've wondered about. I had several grad classes where we talked about Elizabethan Renaissance era alchemy. We focus on, John Donne, Ben Jonson, Edmund Spencer, a lot of these, Shakespearean era writers and poets, and a lot of them were obsessed with esotericism. A lot of people don't know that. But what I've never really heard about, we know about this possibility of maybe something going on in the terms of the Renaissance, Middle Ages era with Templars and Pico della Mirandola and these characters, and maybe they experienced something to do with shrooms and drugs. Is there any evidence after this period? We don't hear about drugs or substances for so many centuries until more recently. So I'm just curious, like, do we have evidence of like experimentation in British Empire? I mean, we know about opium being, used as war against, China. The British Empire uses opium war to psyops and whatnot. What about, are any of these Elizabethan poets experimenting? Do you know?
Yeah. So during the Elizabethan era, opium was certainly one that was going around, and potentially cannabis and hashish. We know for a fact, multiple scholars have documented that hashish use for quote unquote mystical purposes was already present in Spain by the 13th century, by the time the Zohar was written. And that all these practices actually moved from Syria, Egypt, across northern Africa, and then entered into Spain. So we know for a fact that before the Reconquista of Spain, people were using hashish and ritualistic practices due to Islamic Sufis actually either smoking
is this from the Hashemites, the Hashashin, the assassins?
It's tied with that, and obviously it's people question whether the Nizari Ismailis were they really high on hashish when they committed these assassinations. It's a debated topic, but what is a fact is that the culture milieu that the Hashashins come from were actually using these practices, and that you can literally trace the Sufi use of hashish, and then certain communities actually saying, okay, no more of that. And then it just continues to move eventually across northern Africa, where in Morocco, we have cases in the 12th century where people go and are saying, yeah, the Muslims are literally consuming hashish before they enter in the mosque, and getting high and then going to the mosque for various ceremonies. When the Reconquista happens, they try to stamp all this hashish use out. But be it with Giordano Bruno, for example, it's speculated that he was actually high on hashish when he came up with the belief that all the stars were actually suns. And so by the time that, and France in particular was very infatuated with the Oriental. And so by the time the English, I forget the Englishman's name that wrote 1001 Nights, But by the time that was written, and especially into the Victorian era, people were absolutely experimenting with cannabis and hashish, and it was very popular, specifically in France. And that's where you get people, poets and stuff in the English period going down to
Yeah, I
Paris
remember
so that
reading
they
like
could.
some of the Irish and famous British poets were taking opium and stuff like that. But that was the only thing I really ever
And it
heard.
came from this belief that, from again, the book, The 1001 Nights, was actually incredibly influential in Europe for the normalization and consumption of hashish, in the belief that it actually elevated you to these ancient spiritual beliefs and truth to some sort. And that's what, so people, famous poets, were actually traveling to France during that period, uh, to engage in these practices, believing that the Oriental was able to preserve something that Christianity tried to stomp out. Again, we just talked about the Reconquista, and they were not in favor of these practices. So by the time, just before the Victorian era, they were like, oh well, now we have these practices back, just like the Orientals had, and now we're not tainted by, the Catholic Church can't control everything we do anymore. And so then you start getting into the 1800s, and the experimentation with nitrous oxide and anesthetics becomes a huge thing for people to engage for mystical spiritual purposes. I mean, this is, by the time of William James, so this is late 1800s, early 1900s. William James, that's his first experiment. So his the whole book on his belief on definition of religion, it has to do with his nitrous oxide experiences, and arguing that these getting inebriated actually, again, for them, allows you to bypass the rational mind so that you can then engage or interact with these sort of spiritual, I guess you could say super rational or irrational entities. So you can literally trace, even though R. Gordon Wasson in 1957 really makes psilocybin mushrooms come onto the stage for the first time, all before that, Western Europe was engaging in opium use, laudanum drinking, various form of anesthetics, nitrous oxide, and then hashish. So those things were absolutely being used from the Renaissance forward. You can find evidence of that throughout Western Europe.
And of course, we know that Afghanistan is a region, Kashmir region, very important going back to ancient times for poppies for opium. So that's an ancient thing too. And there's a whole book on this called Invisible Empire that's really good from Gould and Fitzgerald, where they kind of theorize that for a long time empires and kingdoms have sought to really try to control that region, not just because it's the gateway to Eurasia, but also because of this magical poppy that grows there that can be used for these rituals and whatnot.
Yeah,
we
that's
got
where we
a
get the
super
term
chat.
Kush.
Go ahead.
Kush comes from that Central Asian area where all that
Exactly.
stuff grows, and it's believed by scholars that's actually how the Indians got it. So, um, smoking ganja in the Indian context, like that whole tradition comes from their proximity to Kush
Yeah.
in that Central Asian area, and then they've incorporated into their Hindu practice. So now you can find various practices and spiritual men that's literally all they do is they get high and then do these meditations or perform yoga all day. So yeah, that region is incredibly important in regards to opium and marijuana or cannabis use. That's where that stuff really comes from.
Jarhead Orthodox $10 says, "This is a great topic. Can people like Joe Rogan and his guests stop trying to convince everybody that early Christians were on shrooms and that icons are all shrooms because there's a cow in the icon?" Yeah, it's kind of funny. I didn't even realize until that guy was on with you guys that
I had never
the
heard that.
cows somehow, because cows poop, then that means that that was the dumbest argument I've ever heard. But I mean, is that just I mean, are they just like making up stuff? Like, where does this idea that because there's a cow it means? I mean, are there even hallucinogenic mushrooms that grow in the Middle East? Maybe there are, and I just don't know. But it seems like a climate maybe that wouldn't foster this. I don't know.
I'm not sure. I wouldn't be surprised, given again my understanding of Hinduism, if You know, some people think it's an astrological thing of why they don't eat
No, no,
meat.
not Hinduism. I'm talking about the like Middle East, Israel, Palestine, like that
Oh,
region, that area. Is there a growth of a mushroom or hallucinogenic? I mean, I know there's not
I,
peyote.
yeah, they don't have peyote. I am not sure. I know they have like the acacia bush. Like that's the argument from actually Rick Strassman. He's the DMT researcher that really was behind the Spirit Molecule documentary with Joe Rogan. It's all based on this book, and in this book they put them on IV drips of DMT. And in this book, he claims that the acacia bush has DMT, and if you could distill it in the proper way, that these people could be inebriated. And he makes the argument, which I've never seen another scholar actually try to validate, that the burning bush, what he calls the myth of the burning bush with Moses, was actually an acacia bush, and that he was getting high on DMT in front of that burning bush, and that's where this whole thing comes from. That's
Okay, so I was gonna say, because I mean, the rest of these things, it seems like it would have to be imported. Um, you know, maybe they were. I remember some druggy Gnostic-ish person at one time trying to argue that, you know, when the Israelites are in the desert and they wake up and the manna is there, oh, the manna must be, you know, shrooms or something. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure there wouldn't be mushrooms in the desert. That doesn't seem like a thing that would grow in the desert.
Yeah, in the desert, I doubt there's. Again, according to some of these guys find the most minuscule amounts of anything that's psychoactive, and then create a theory of how this could be ritualistically used in some manner. In regards to psilocybin, obviously it grows out of cow dung, so I could see potentially. But again, with the Eleusinian mysteries, that's in the Mediterranean, and that just has to do with a fungus. And so, if the Eleusinian mystery is in the Kekekion is some sort of ergotamine fungus, well, maybe there's something going on around that period or those areas. I wouldn't be surprised, but I do not know of any specific psychoactive substance that is indicative or exclusive to that region.
What about just to kind of change the focus a little bit, because it's something that pops in my head a lot, is a lot of the Russo-Finnish Nordic stories and tales have this sort of father mushroom, father, it's not Father Christmas, but he's like, I don't know, like ice claws, like snow claws version of Santa. There's actually, I forget the Russian name for like Father Snowtime, whatever he is, but there's like an older pagan version of like, you know what I'm talking about? Like,
Yeah.
And then sometimes in the Russo-Finnish sort of pagan traditions, this is linked to mushrooms at times. Have you heard this?
Yeah, it's kind of like the John Mark Allegro, where it's blown out of proportion, where people argue that Christian Christmas is rooted within this pagan Amanita muscaria mushroom ritual. But at least from what we actually do know regarding that argument, is that these Eskimo people that live closer towards the North Pole and the Siberia, that they do practice a form of shamanism, and that they do ingest Amanita muscaria mushrooms, and that they do pluck these things, and that they drink the urine of reindeer because it filters. So the Amanita muscaria mushroom is actually toxic. It has muscimol in it. And so you have to let it sit and dry for an extensive period of time before it can be consumed, or you'll get really sick. This is why they say it's a toxic mushroom. It can kill you. Well, if you just eat it when it's wet, it can kill you. And so they have to let this thing dry. Or another mechanism is allow the reindeers, which we do know that reindeers do eat this particular mushroom. And then you drink their urine, which we know that they did. And so there's an argument that the mythology of Santa Claus flying around on a sleigh behind reindeer,
Yes.
dressed in red and white, is tied with this sort of ritualistic use of the Amanita muscaria mushroom. They claim that the reason we put presents under the Christmas tree is because these mushrooms grow under coniferous trees, and that they're like the gifts that the gods have given the people. And then they take the presents and they set them on the tree so that they can dry in the sun, and that the reindeers consume them. And because the reindeers can get high along with the people, that they fly across the world together, and that Santa Claus is like shaman Claus or something like that. certainly those practices do exist. But once you then try to say that's the origin of Christmas, like that's just an anachronistic, ahistorical argument. It just doesn't hold up. To then argue, which they do, is that the entirety of Christian Christmas is a solar ritual that's tied with these pagan practices that is reincorporated into the birth of God, which is really due to the death and rebirth of the people that ate the Amanita muscaria mushroom. So in regards to the grand narrative, there's no historical evidence for that. In regards to the specific use of the Siberian Eskimo native peoples, yes. But then to take what those people did and then say, look at Christmas, it's all that. No, that's not a strong argument at all.
What I was trying to, the name I couldn't think of is, he's called Ded Moroz, and that's the Russian pagan name for Father Frost or Grandfather Frost. And if you look at him, it's funny because he looks kind of like, the way he's drawn and the way they make him up, he kind of looks like a pagan version of like Bishop Nicholas. He's like a
yeah.
He's an interesting character, but it reminds me too of, there's a really funny kind of classic episode of Mystery Science Theater called Jack Frost, and then Riff Tracks, the more recent instantiation, they redid the old Mystery Science Theater version. It's a 1964 movie that they kind of riff on and make fun of. It's really right up this alley, because they basically take a bunch of the Russo-Finnish pagan myths and tales, and they put it into this really weird, trippy movie. With Father Frost and with Father Mushroom, all these weird sort of pagan characters. Everybody should watch it because it ties in perfectly with what we're talking about. I'm going to put it in the chat because I actually found it on YouTube. But every time we talk about this, I think of Father Frost, and it makes me think of this movie, because in the movie, before Father Frost arrives, you have to have this encounter with Father Mushroom, who's this little weird sort of trippy dude out in the... He's a little trickster deity who exists as a gnome in the forest, and this is again a combination of a bunch of the mythology from that region. But Thomas Trezier became a member. What's up, man? Guys, want to support the stream? You can do so by using super chats or Streamlabs. The Streamlabs link is pinned, and remember, guys, Streamlabs does not take a cut. So if you would like to support the stream, and I will give a portion of this to Dr.
I appreciate you having me on, bro. You don't need to.
What's that?
You don't need to split it, man. Just I appreciate you having me on.
Well, you guys, if you want to, also, I've got in the show description. We'll be getting to this here in a second. But Dr. Patrick Harry has also set up Logos Academy, so I'll go ahead and give you guys that link right there. It's also in the show description, and this is going to be kind of his sort of private tutoring approach to what the way he's going to do education. I think this is the future of education. As you guys know, I offer a course on philosophy through Richard Groves's outlet as well, Autonomy Agora Marketplace. That's in the show description too. You can get my philosophy course. We'll talk about that in a minute, but A. Panini says for £5, Ritual Abuse and Mind Control, The Manipulation of Attachment is a book by Orit Epstein, Joseph Schwartz, and Rachel Schwartz. Okay, we'll have to check out that book. This kind of, actually, I think this is the book that Jamie, my wife, has. I think she has that book. Me and Eugene, $5. Let's go, fellas. Rachel Wilson sends $20. Thank you so much, Rachel Wilson. Appreciate that. She says number 1. CK, what's up to one of our growing black audience members? As you guys know, I identify as a black man, and that's bringing more and more.
You're huge in that community.
I am growing. I'm gonna be like I'm gonna be basically the next Tyler Perry when I do some stand up for the black people in the black community. Thank you, CK. Appreciate that. Harvest, $5. Somehow I came across this channel in the last week or two. I'm still trying to figure out what it is, but I'm here. Well, we do all kinds of stuff, so that might be what's throwing you for a loop. So sometimes I do comedic streams, sometimes I do very focused geopolitical streams, sometimes we do interviews like with the great Dr. David Patrick Harry. Sometimes we just, joke around. It's all over the place. We do it all here, but thank you for being with us. Harvest. Chairs for 20 secs, which is some shitty currency that ends up being about 30 cents, but thank you for that. DPH, are you, let me preface this with, I don't know if he is, but I am familiar. Of course, we had a bad interaction with this individual some years back. And I think this person has ended up in Mormonism, but Kotel, are you familiar with Jan Irvin and Gnostic media claims? And he was one of the characters that was on those early Joe Rogan podcasts when Joe was first talking about Allegro and all that.
I am familiar with Jan. I've never interacted or engaged with him. From my understanding, he was big into the psychedelic stuff, and then he was like big into calling out the intelligence agencies behind McKenna and Leary. And then last I was aware, he like changed all of his stuff to like Logos Media and was Christian.
Well, he's Mormon.
He's Mormon now. Okay, so yeah, I really don't follow that guy. He actually wrote a book that's mentioned in this one, the Psychedelic Gospels, where he tried to argue for this Eucharistic mushroom theory within Christianity. So unfortunately, his book, for him, unfortunately, was never touted. No academic actually used it or cited it. Even Jerry Brown says that the research in it's very dubious, and that is him literally interpreting anything that he could pull in regards to mushroom or psychedelics, trying to argue that this is the origin of Christianity.
Hush Tone says for $5, we all know that you're honorary black because you always show up later than your live streams are set for. Well, the explanation for that is that Jay Dyer time just also happened to coincide with black people time, and so we actually linked up on being late, and we decided that we're all one people, bro. Jet for $5. We need David Patrick Harry on Sam Tripoli's tinfoil hat. That would be an interesting conversation. I know Sam likes to go out there in the weeds in terms of the psychedelic speculations. So maybe, I don't know if Kotel, would you be interested in going on some of the comedian streams?
Yeah, absolutely.
Want me to suggest?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
I'd definitely be down.
I'll see if Tripoli's interested. Seamus, $20, says, have you ever thought about consulting for Orthodox or Roman Catholics on the issue related to converting pagans and occultists? Both churches have seen their exorcism ministries grow, and they say that the growth of occultism is an issue. I'll answer this, and then I'll let Kotel answer. I don't really know that the priests need consultation from myself. I wouldn't call myself an expert on the occult. I've read a lot about the occult, written some books on it in terms of Hollywood and symbolism, but I don't really think typically for catechesis anything like that's really necessary. Maybe just more so perhaps awareness that occult traditions are growing and becoming more popular. We probably will need more and more exorcisms as time goes by. But in the Orthodox Church, exorcisms are typically just part of baptism. It's not like this special ritual like in the Roman Catholic world, the Latin rite of exorcism and all this kind of stuff. It's a little more Hollywoodized. Kotel, what do you think about consulting Roman Catholics on occultism?
I think that's a dubious idea. And really for catechesis, the only thing that an Orthodox priest needs to make aware of to a catechumen is that occultism and the effectiveness of actual occult rituals is real. And I get people that are catechumens, they ask me that question, well, what do you think about magic? And it's like, well, our paradigm says that this stuff is actually real. You don't need to learn about it. And I wouldn't recommend anybody until you're brought into the church and really understand and gain a phronema of orthodoxy, because I've talked with a handful of guys that had like 1 foot still in this occult, magical, spiritual world, and then 1 foot in the orthodoxy, and orthodoxy for them was very like a rational argumentation. And then I talk with them, and lo and behold, 6 months goes by, and the asceticism and the spirituality of orthodoxy isn't as appealing as being able to still take drugs and do all this other stuff. So I think for anybody getting in the church, just focus on orthodoxy. And once you're in, if you want to then go back and look at the history of this stuff, feel free.
John of San Francisco sent $25, says, thank you for this, all this help. You've helped me learn a lot and kept me sane at my work. God bless. Yeah, a lot of people listen at work, and I'm glad that it helps keep you guys sane. That's good to know. Ellie's W's became a member for 3 months. Welcome, Ellie. Guys, be sure and check the member section over here. And, of course, also have the member section at the website. It's largely the same material, but of course I haven't been able to move everything from the website over here on YouTube because we've only been remonetized for a few months now on YouTube. But anything new, of course, goes into the members section on YouTube as well. And yes, overall it is pretty much the same material, but the full archive is available at the website. Feels for Days, £5. We evolved from monkeys. They was eating magic poo-poo pee-pee mushrooms. Also, Father Frost is a communist version of Santa. I think Father Frost is way pre-communism. He's an older pagan version, but perhaps the Soviets did utilize Father Frost as some sort of way to kind of war against the, St. Nicholas or something in the church. But communists, interestingly, they tended to, socialists and communists have tended, at least in the terms of the party, to be anti-drugs. Isn't that what you find to be the case?
Yeah, hardcore communists tend to, be kind of anti-drugs because that could give you some pernicious ideas that are anti-communist. They can't control that.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, I'm pretty sure the Soviet party didn't want, drugs going on a larger scale, but maybe early Bolsheviks were super party oriented, and then I don't know the whole history of exactly how they viewed drugs, but I would think that my guess would be
I think alcohol was definitely warmly welcome, but I don't know of any, at least me personally, I don't know of anything regarding inebriate substances in communism. Typically, from my understanding, the Bolsheviks were not interested in allowing people to get inebriated. You could drink as much alcohol as you want. They didn't care about that.
Yeah. Dance Commodore, 250 Rons. I love David Patrick Harry. Also, thank you for your comedy, Jay. The only place where I laugh and get educated at the same time. Yeah, I think that's kind of what we've always wanted to do was, synthesize both of those things, have it be edutainment, infotainment, and have it be, funny and fun at the same time. Let's see, we got some more super chats. Cholo Mexicano, $10. When are we going to slaughter some of those sacred cows and make hamburgers? Yeah, I mean, I've always wondered, I can't prove this, but I've always wondered if India's worship of the cow was somehow related to like the ancient, when Aaron, when Moses goes up on the mountain and they're worshiping the calf, the god of Egypt, like maybe Egypt bequeathed this, deity in some way to India. Maybe India was reverencing the deity earlier and it somehow got into Egypt. Do you know much about that? Any theories on that?
No, the theories regarding the veneration of the calf, some believe it has to do with the zodiac that these practices originated in, that it may have been a veneration of, was it Aries? Which one's the bull? No, Taurus, during some like the Taurus period. Again, this is kind of in the wheelhouse of the Graham Hancock, like looking at the sidereal time and the zodiacs, to trying to figure out mythology and stuff like that. Some people argue that's where this stuff comes from. Others have argued, like the Gnostic guy that was on my open panel, that this has to do with psilocybin mushrooms with cow dung. Potentially. It's kind of an unsolved mystery as what is the actual reason why cows are so highly venerated within Hinduism, because at least historically, at least like in the Rig Veda period, that wasn't the case.
Let's see, we got Jet sends $5 and says, no, we read that one, excuse me. Bust down Jubilee. Okay, Joe, $1. Let's give Dr. DPH some flowers. How much do you guys love and watch DPH, Jay? I watch pretty much, I would say 90% of DPH's streams I end up watching. Let's see. Jason Cassell. Wow, he sends $100. Thanks, man. Appreciate that. He says, hello, gentlemen. I'm a new Orthodox, but I am wrong. Am I wrong to assume that people that claim to have spiritual awakenings and finding God are suffering from prelest? Well, we don't know. I think time usually tells whether that person was having a real experience. I think it's possible that even a bad drug trip could spur a person on to go to church or to seek God. I mean, that's possible. I just think that time is the ultimate sort of determiner, because if a person isn't really serious or interested in it and they have some sort of ecstatic drug experience, that tends to fade, and then people move on to other things. But we'll ask Dr. David Patrick Carey, to what degree in your life did hallucinogens indirectly maybe point you in the direction of Christianity and God, or maybe it didn't? And do you think these things can potentially be ways where people accidentally wake up to real Christianity or something?
So obviously, because of my background, I've dealt with a lot of Orthodox converts that come from the sort of psychonaut area. And there are a handful of cases in which people had some type of mystical encounter that changed their direction and orientation. I had something similar. I would never say that taking psychedelics like brings you closer to God, because I also had a lot of weird things that I thought were going to come true that never did. I mean, Terence McKenna and his time wave zero theory, he thought that like time machines were going to be invented, or the apocalypse of some sort. The end of history was in the year 2000. And I think this is consistent with like these weird fabrications you get when you go into altered psychonautic space. And then you're totally convinced because of the phenomenological experience that something is getting ready to occur, and then it never does. For me personally, it was actually after I did that PhD course on Orthodoxy, history, and theology, and I began watching some Josiah Trenum videos that summer. And Jay, I actually told you that it was the first video I watched of yours. Now I'm blanking on the title, but it was like on logos and theories of numbers, or something of that. I forget exactly what the title was, but I clicked on your video, and you were talking about sort of the paradigm and really doing a kind of presuppositional approach to philosophy and theology. And I was still psychedelic, but I really liked this paradigm of orthodoxy. But again, I'm a non-believer. I'm not interested in joining a man-made institution. And that just kind of wore on me towards that last semester that I took. I did a high dose LSD trip in my apartment in Berkeley, California. And at the end of it, I had this quote unquote epiphany that all these things I liked about psychedelic spirituality or the new age, be it fractal mathematics, sacred geometry, cymatics, the unity of peoples, that actually all this stuff is reinterpreted and properly expressed within Christianity regarding logos metaphysics. And that's where your video on numbers like actually influenced this realization later. But loving your neighbor as yourself, as opposed that we're all one, like this solipsism of psychedelics is properly interpreted as that, no, you love your neighbor as yourself, but actually you're distinct peoples. And so I had this quote unquote epiphany, and it was that night in 2018 that I began to pray for the first time since, again, that I lost my naive Methodist faith. And then I was convinced that I was John Searle. For those who don't know, he's a famous analytic philosopher, arguably the most famous still living. And he was fired from Berkeley, California when I was there. And as he was fired, that next semester, I did a course on person and neuroscience where he presented his Chinese room thought experiment, which kind of debunks the functionalist definition of AI, sentient intelligence, and stuff like that. But he talked a little bit about being fired and how he asked like some woman who was like almost 50 years old out to dinner, and he was in his 70s, and he's probably the biggest, one of the biggest figures at Berkeley. Well, they fired him for sexual harassment. And so I'm sitting there in Berkeley with him also being an instructor now at the Dominican school because he can't teach at Berkeley.
You're also a straight white male who's going to get fired for asking,
Exactly.
That's what they do. Like, I think, you know this, but like when I decided that I didn't want to be in academia, I wanted to get a PhD and all that. I was in grad school, and I was like, okay, I realized it's very much a clique, and these feminists, these radical liberals, like they don't want anyone like us in that sphere.
No, and that was very palpable being in the Bay Area. And so after that experience, I decided, holy shit, I got to do something, because I cannot depend on working for a university. And that's actually what eventually led to me creating Church of the Eternal Logos. Is I thought, and I had this pro psychedelic channel, but my whole, again, that journey from Orthodoxy, and then you and Father Josiah, and then eventually now in my heart feeling like Christianity is the truth. I didn't want to keep making all that content promoting Terence McKenna and Timothy Leary. So I thought, man, the only option for me is to create a new YouTube channel. And so my mom got diagnosed with an illness at that time, and I was kind of going through a crisis. I needed to decide if I was going to stay in Berkeley to finish my dissertation and use their resources, or just do it remotely. And so I went, the last time I took quote unquote psychedelics, I did an ayahuasca ceremony in Joshua Tree. And this is before becoming Orthodox, but during this whole transitional phase. And during that experience, I had done a lot of psychedelics, but I never had the experience I had during this ayahuasca ceremony, where I consumed the ayahuasca. Anybody who's done these things, again, don't do it. I'm not advising any of this stuff. I'm just sharing you what my journey and my experience was. Consumed it. I got people around me at this ceremony. This female shaman, the shamaness, she's singing songs and doing her ikaros and all this stuff. I got people crawling around the floor acting like jaguars, and I'm not feeling anything. So I asked for another cup. Then I asked for another cup. I do 3 cups of ayahuasca. The trip comes on, and the realization I had was, if we're going to be judged, which almost every religious mythology has some type of judgment after death, well, it only makes sense if God took on human form. And so I became like fully convinced in my heart that Jesus Christ was a historical person, and it was God incarnate. And then the second realization was, if I want to be like Christ, it's time for me to build something and stop consuming drugs, consuming the ideas of McKenna, consuming culture. And I felt compelled to create Church of the Eternal Logos. So that was in like July of 2019. And then in August of 2019, I launched Church of the Eternal Logos. And in September 2019, I moved home from Berkeley and try to begin finishing all my PhD stuff while starting the new YouTube channel, where I'm no longer doing what I'm doing. I'm producing my own content, and I'm trying to present it from the lens of Orthodoxy. And so once I moved back to Indiana in September 2019, that's when I became a catechumen in the Orthodox Church, and never done that stuff since. So did psychedelics lead me to Christ? Not really. If anything, I almost felt convicted when I got into those spaces the last 2 times I did it. One, reaffirming Christianity as actually fulfilling the things that I believe to be true. And then the second one, it was time for me to start my own business and actually become a man. And if Christ was, if he built things, if he was a carpenter, it was time for me to begin to build something. And the irony of that experience is that the ayahuasca stopped. And this, and people said, "Oh, that's because you're doing too much drugs, man. Your serotonin levels were low." No, this had been a long, long period before I'd done psychedelics before this. I'm very aware of how all that stuff worked. We even did like the spiritual fasting before the ceremony, but it shut down. Like there was no trip at all. I was completely sober. The shaman was surprised. She couldn't believe it, because I was telling her, "Look, I'm not feeling it anymore." And she's like, "You just had 3 cups. Like I'm not going to give you any more." And then there's a second night. And the second night, it just didn't work. And so to me, that was God telling me, "Look, you got to stop doing this stuff." And to me, it was almost like a mystical experience, in the sense that the drugs didn't work, because that had never, ever happened before. So did Christ meet me in that state? Potentially. I think he can meet people anywhere. Do psychedelics take you towards Christ? Absolutely not.
Yeah, I would say it reminds me of, you and I both have been on your mate Tom's channel and podcast, and, we did some pretty in-depth interviews with him. And, there was a period where he was really interested in Orthodoxy and Christianity, and it was because he says he had this really dark sort of demonic trip, and he was seeing, demonic entities and stuff like that. And, and then he ended up, for whatever reason, I'm not knocking the dude, it's just, he ended up just not continuing in the direction of Christianity. So, even when you have these sort of bad trips or intense experiences, and you think you're seeing spiritual realities or you're experiencing demons, I'm not saying you're not, I'm just saying, like, these trips kind of, I would take them with a grain of salt, as I guess what I'm trying to say in terms of drug trips. I've had bad trips. My first trip was a really bad trip. It didn't immediately make me, go to church or seek out Christianity. Maybe a year or 2 later, because of a bad trip, and sort of, I guess I would say in my situation, it did kind of wake me up to spiritual realities, but I wasn't moving in the direction of Christianity after it. Maybe it did make me start asking some questions that I maybe wouldn't have asked before doing LSD, but I definitely wouldn't attribute conversion to drugs.
Right.
Panos, what's up, Pano? He says for $5. Congratulations on the PhD, Kotel.
Thank
You
you.
guys should consider a collaboration with Dr. Nathan Jacobs. I know he's buddies with FDA. I've just not yet. I haven't met him. We haven't spoken. I'm sure he's a cool dude. I think the conversations that you guys would have would be beefy. What are your recommendations for people outside of academia in terms of something to look into to stay sharp, informed, and constantly learning? I'm sure Kotel would recommend his course, which is linked, Logos Academy, which is linked in the show description. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about that? Because I do want to get back into some more of the topics. I want to talk about Esalen Institute. You know, you've recommended a lot of books over the years. And one of those that I got was this History of Esalen that you recommended.
What'd you think of it?
Most of the books that you mentioned on these topics, I do end up buying. This one maybe is not for people trying to stay up on top of things. It's just a book that I heard you mention that I wanted to get. But
it's not, I would argue it's the best. Now it's written by Dr. Jeffrey Kripal, who runs a Gnostic, esoteric, mystical institute out of Rice. It's kind of one of the only programs in the U.S. like it. There's a few in Europe where you can get like a PhD. And Eric Davis, who's a famous author, he was like the last one to interview Terence McKenna. He just got a PhD from Rice under Dr. Kripal. Jeffrey Kripal was asked by Michael Murphy, the founder of the Esalen Institute, to write the sort of ultimate historical overview. And so if you're an academic like Jay or myself, it's a useful book. Not that you agree with like how the author's presenting it, but it's really useful in seeing the historical trajectory and narrative of that institute.
are you going to take your thesis and put it into something readable, or like what is there a book? Maybe there is a different book that you would recommend that's like the best overview of like hallucinogens and spirituality, and what do you think?
I have not found a great overview of most of the work that gets into psychedelics is almost always written by somebody who's
Exactly, right.
So it's very biased. Most of the stuff, and even amongst the scholars, because in academia, most people don't engage with this stuff unless they're like closely associated with the practices of it. Almost every PhD that's involved with psychedelic studies is themselves a psychonaut. So my plan is to eventually write some type of book, be it about 150 to 100 pages. It's for an average reader on a literal historical overview of these substances and their relationship to mysticism and how it then emerges in the 20th century and kind of take you up to the 21st century. It's really just a historical overview. I do plan on doing that. I have a paper titled Technologies of Transcendence that I wrote during the PhD program that I want to rework and expand on for that. And it's basically arguing that drugs are a form of technology for mystical transcendence. I'm not arguing in favor of them. And then I just document from the ancient period. The paper only goes up to Aleister Crowley, but adding a whole another chapter or a whole couple sections on the 20th century, yeah, that's something that I want to do. And I'll probably turn that into a course for the Logos Academy eventually. You're muted. I can't hear you.
Tell us about Logos Academy. I'm looking at it over here, the link. Long-form lectures, private breakdowns, philosophical training. What are you envisioning here? Is there a course already up? I see you've got already 86 members. What's the overall plan here?
So the idea is this is a men's community. So I'm sorry, women out there. This is for men, and it's a male-only space. And the idea of the Logos Academy, obviously I don't run a church, but my YouTube channel is called Church of the Eternal Logos. It's just a theological perspective from Logos on various topics. And Logos Academy is trying to basically build an environment for men, young men, but most of the people in there are already like established men, where we can talk about and discuss anything. And I can then utilize my academic or educational skills for that community specifically. So the first thing that we're going to do, I mean, right now what we have is I have all my exclusive members content and part 2 streams that I actually have to thank Jay for, because he's the one that gave me the idea. And then we actually need to thank Jamie, because she's the one that gave him the idea. But all those streams that I've done, those are over on the Logos Academy now, much more accessible and easily to access. the goal is to take the dissertation, which is very, very academic. This is not a mass reader. This is like 300 pages of dense academic intellectual history on the relationship of technology from really the medieval period, and it's tied with millenarianism, and how transhumanism, I make the argument, actually emerges out of a Christian ethos, beginning with John Scotus Erigena. He was one of the court philosophers for the Carolingian Empire right in the middle of the 800s. And he was a Neoplatonist. He was an Irish Neoplatonist. And he developed this idea that the mechanical arts, because during the Carolingian era, there's what's referred to as the Carolingian Renaissance, where like the plow and the watermill and these things emerged as technologies that allowed labor to be easier. And of course, during that period, you have the rise of the Benedictines, of the ora et labora, tying a sort of spirituality with work. And I argue that John Scotus Erigena then presented that technology was going to redeem all the lost attributes of Adam. So Adam was a perfect spiritual person, and everything he lost to become the corrupted man, technology was going to redeem in us. And then I traced that concept and the dispositions towards technology through people like Hugh of St. Victor, Roger Bacon, and this gets tied with Giacomo Fiore's millenarianism, where he believed this third age, the age of the Holy Spirit, sacraments were no longer important. The priesthood was no longer, essentially it's a form of Protestantism, because it was the age of holy men. As long as you were virtuous and spiritual, the Holy Spirit would inform you, and this was going to be a utopian age. It was kind of a millenarian disposition. Well, that literally informs somebody like Francis Bacon when he writes The New Atlantis, where he develops a new understanding of science, and he does away with the Aristotelian understanding of categories and logic. Not that he's against that stuff, but he presents a new utilitarian form of science, that science and knowledge is all about practical utility. And I trace that into then the founding of the Royal Society, the founding of speculative Freemasonry, and the rise of the engineer. You get people like Henry St. Simon and Auguste Comte, where now you have this positivist scientific philosophy, which is still millenarian. And then I tie that with America being the city on the hill, and that many people, theologians, whether it be John Edwards moving forward, believe that America was going to be the millenarian kingdom. And so that dissertation traces that idea into then contemporary transhumanism as a form of post-secular deification, Orthodox theosis, and then I demonstrate how both of these are basically two competing narratives coming out of the Christian world regarding deification. One is pre-modern, the Orthodox theosis, which maintains the old metaphysical order and essentially Aristotelian categories and all this stuff, where the new one is coming out of this historical thread where technology and existential pursuits are going to lead us towards utopia, and that Orthodoxy views transhumanism in its own eschatological terms related to the Antichrist.
Yes, well, we both, you and I both covered in our videos the Peter Thiel interview, where Thiel seems to sort of take Christianity as this allegory for technological transhumanism and immortality. That's kind of my reading of that weird interview. And he mentioned, what was it, Rene Girard. I've not read. I have the book. Somebody recommended it, but I haven't ever gotten to it yet. So I'm assuming that he just sort of takes the Christianity in this sort of a symbolic way, kind of a Jordan Peterson style.
Yeah,
approach.
He does. And so to wrap up that whole dissertation, that is basically an Orthodox Christian critique of transhumanism, utilizing the methodology of intellectual history. That's what that is. And my goal is to have that published by the end of August. So the Logos Academy, that is a separate project, obviously related to it, and that may turn into courses. But the first thing we're going to do in the Logos Academy, we have bi-monthly meetings where we have free-form conversations, and then we just had one last night. And the members want to do like topic-themed 2-hour conversation. So maybe I post an article or something, and then if people want to read it, you don't have to read it, but you can then join the meeting and we can talk about things like a classroom setting. And then we have a fitness group that kind of holds people accountable for fitness, diet, spiritual life, and then career or life goals. And so those are the 3 meetings we do every month. And my goal is to create the first course will be a history on logos, beginning with the pre-Socratics, people like Heraclitus, and this idea of logos moving into eventually the Gospel of John and the ending of the Neoplatonic academies. And that will be tied with, my goal is to create an ebook related to that. And then another course on the history of metaphysics, essentially from the medieval period to the postmodern turn in the 20th century. And that is the kind of continuation of the same conversation. And then I want to build out a course that is going to go into deeper to regards to that ebook. So those are kind of the two big projects that we talked about last night in the group that I want to try to get done by the end of this year. So by the end of 2025, there should be 2 full courses on the history of logos, the history of metaphysics, tied with ebooks that are kind of introductions to those topics. And then part 2 streams, exclusive videos, all my show notes or study guides are available for the group. And then of course our 3 meetings each month, plus sometimes Q&As. So that's kind of what we do at the group. And it's kind of themed like an ancient academy. I mean, last night, some of the guys are like professional power lifters, and it's an interesting amalgamation of different guys. And it's just a place for us to come together as, adults, as men, and be able to learn and discuss things that you really can't with other people.
Yeah, it's good to reclaim men's spaces. That's such a neglected thing, given the dominance of feminism in our era. I want to remind you guys that I will be speaking at the 3rd annual Ludwell Orthodox Fellowship Conference in Stafford, Virginia. This is outside of D.C., so if you're in the D.C. region, this is September 6th, 2025. I will be speaking there along with Metropolitan Jonah, Jim Jatras, our good buddy, Buck Johnson, our good friend, Protodeacon Dr. Patrick, Father Turbo, and some other priests and people I'm not familiar with. I'm sure they're all great people. I'm just not familiar with. And of course, Rebecca, that runs Dissident Media. It's going to be a great conference, Saturday, September 6th, 2025, Stafford, Virginia, and you can get the tickets in the link in the show description and the link right there. We'll also be having a upcoming conference here in Florida. Once again, this will be our 2nd conference at my church here in Florida. The first conference that we did on iconography with Father Deacon and Father Vladimir was a big hit. We had a lot of fun. We had a nice crowd, so we're going to have an even bigger conference, bigger crowd this year. This year's focus, I don't have the ticket page up. It will be in November, just to let you guys know. So we do have plenty of time, but the theme this year will be Athens and Jerusalem. So we're going to be contrasting these 2 approaches to reality, to society, civilization. One, of course, focusing on human reasoning and philosophy, and of course, Jerusalem focusing on the person of Christ, the Messiah, and divine revelation. So, what is the relationship? Is it an antipathy? Is it an antithesis? As Tertullian said, what hath Athens to do with Jerusalem? Or is there a possibility of overlap, or what? That will be the focus. We'll also be getting into aesthetics. Of course, Father Vladimir lectures on art history. He's an art history teacher. He focuses on the techniques and styles of the Renaissance masters and how they put certain structures and geometric patterns and forms into their works. And that also, of course, influences later Russian art styles. Dance Commodore, no wait, we did that one. Textus became a member. Shout out to Textus. Jonathan Britton, $2. This is a kind of a complicated question. Basically, he asks, what is the Orthodox Church's idea on THC, CBD, psilocybin, etc.? In short, I will answer it as saying that I think that anything can be medicinal because everything that exists, God created and created it good. But any of those things could also be conceivably abused. This is a great question, though, that I'm going to ask Kotel. I'll ask Dr. DPH. Are there any potential medicinal usages for mushrooms and these kinds of things? I know we have this MAPS thing going, which is, I think, Soros funded. And I'm not talking about minor attracted persons. I'm talking about a different thing. The thing that has to do with like studying hallucinogens. Yes. I would say, like, I knew a guy who was a severe alcoholic. He was a good friend of mine from high school. He ended up dying a couple years ago one of my good friends, and I would say, like, in his case, he's at such an advanced state of extreme alcohol addiction that I don't think some extreme measure, like perhaps some program that might have utilized this to help him break free of extreme alcohol addiction. Maybe in some of these extreme cases, something like that could work. But Dr. David Patrick, what do you think?
I agree with you. That's always the response whenever I do a stream on psychedelics. People in the chat go, "Well, what about the John Hopkins research? And the point is that these things are nuanced, and so has psilocybin or MDMA shown signs of effectiveness regarding PTSD or severe forms of addiction? Even ibogaine, yeah, they have. Well, I thought you just told me that these things are spiritually, problematic. Why? Well, clearly it's helping people. Well, as I would argue, is that they do dissolve boundaries. And if you have a boundary due to post-traumatic stress disorder that you're constantly reliving, you're constantly moving through every single time, every time a firework goes off, that, yeah, it has shown that if you get into these altered states and you sort of kind of dissolve these boundaries and have a phenomenological experience where you're able to sort of move beyond them, when you become sober, you're not as throttled with that same stress and that trauma. So are they beneficial in that way? Yeah. I could see how somebody who's in extreme mental anguish due to trauma, that this might be beneficial. Same thing with potential CBD use. I mean, obviously that's not inebriating. THC, everybody points to glaucoma or appetite suppression for people that are cancer patients. Yeah, I could see how that could be beneficial. At the same time, every time you alter your consciousness, you open yourself up to spiritual warfare. I mean, as Orthodox, we're being inundated with thoughts that aren't entirely ours all the time. When you dissolve the ability of self-awareness and even recognize things that are infiltrating your mind, you are way more susceptible to believing and falling victim to prelest than ever before. So they are spiritually dangerous, even if there are potential medical applications in certain circumstances. But just because there are potential benefits doesn't mean that should be a free pass for your own consumption or use because you're self-medicating. If you have a really strong tie to these things and you find it hard to give them up, well, there's probably a deeper problem there.
Yeah, let's see. Pano says again, $5. Thank you guys. Listening to you guys talk about this, I'm reminded about the horrors of narcissistic abuse where the victims are made to doubt their perceptions of reality. Would you say that these substances destroy the gnomic will? I would say that any addiction or any mind-altering substance could conceivably, maybe not destroy the will, but enslave the will.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
No, I totally agree. I mean, anybody who smoked weed, I had a bad habit through my 20s, smoked every single day. Once you get sober, despite what a pothead will tell you that, well, it helps me be creative, it helps me come up with ideas. If you're sober, you have a stronger drive for work, to accomplish things, to achieve goals. Absolutely, it makes you apathetic to some degree. And so if you're sober and living a healthy life, I promise you the quality of your work and the desire to actually accomplish something, and your testosterone is going to go up. Marijuana is a female plant. It's been shown to lower your testosterone.
I might have missed this super chat a couple days ago. Jeff cost us $5. American Eagle releases an ad that isn't super gay and people complain. Neat. Mean Eugene, I think we read that one. Let's see here. Here we go. Storm the Cat, $10. My dad's friend and other friends have encountered witches in the woods. They were standing in a circle, and they had drawn in the mud a circle, and there was a Ouija board, and they were moving in unnatural ways, and supposedly one of them levitated. Well, I would just stay away from the witches. That would be my advice. J-Mel, $30. Why would Carl Jung think Christianity rose out of a Mithra cult? Do you think Jordan Peterson believes that? Well, I mean, probably in the case of Carl Jung, who I've read a decent amount of Carl Jung, I think he probably was just looking for alternative explanations, and why he settled on this one or that one, who knows? I think probably out of just pride and academic, arrogance. And I would say maybe in Jordan Peterson's case, I don't know if he thinks Christianity is Mithra or not, but he just still, can't bite the bullet on Christianity in toto. So, other than that, I don't know. What do you think?
Peterson phenomenon first launched off, I think there's a video on my old YouTube channel before I became Christian. I posted a video from Jordan Peterson, essentially spouting this mushroom type theory related to Christianity. So
really?
I can find it on my old YouTube channel. I can find it and download it.
So you're saying Peterson has in the past endorsed this type of an Allegro theory?
Yeah, some type. I mean, it's
Something
been a while
like
since I watched it, but it was tied with the connection between mushrooms and Christianity, and essentially was promoting the benefits of this sort of inebriating spirituality to enlighten oneself. And he refers to the John Hopkins research and stuff like that, but pulls basically from everybody that we've already discussed presently about this sort of general theme of how Christianity may be tied with inebriating substances. But maybe his opinion has changed. I just remember downloading that and posting it like 2017. And it was when he became popular, he had like tons of videos already on his YouTube channel. And it was an old video that I found on there. At the time, I was into psychedelics, and I thought, oh, wow, Peterson, he knows what's going on. But now it makes you think his Gnosticism and his unwillingness to actually identify as Christian. It's like, okay, maybe he's actually still in that camp.
No, Santos Bonacci is an insane person. I don't know what people in the chat like. I don't know. Like you put this topic in, and it just attracts like the most ridiculous people in the chat. No, we don't deal with insane people over here. Yeah, I remember. We went through on my channel quite a bit of Jordan Peterson's personality lectures. And in those, there's a significant, maybe an entire lecture on Christianity and the Trinity and the person of Christ. And basically, it was just Zeitgeist level stuff that like Isis and Horus and Mary's Isis and Jesus is the son of Ra. It was like Zeitgeist level stuff. So maybe he's still sort of hung up in that mindset. I remember when he debated Zizek in 2019 or 2020, Jesus isn't divine, but he's like this. He's like a symbol for suffering and overcoming or something.
Yeah. And he's like the Adam Kadmon of the astrological cycle. So I remember Santos's stuff. It's all tied with this astrology. It's a mixture of like Jordan Maxwell and, a lot of this like new age spirituality. So I haven't seen or heard of Santos in a while. I'm not sure what he does, but his spirituality is a Gnostic, Illuministic framework where Christ is an archetype for who you're supposed to become, and all the religions are pointing towards this perennial truth, and that the zodiac is the sort of ultimate rubric to understand medicine and healing and the passing of seasons, time, history, all these different things. So it is.
I appreciate you guys being so supportive. It's a good sign when we can't move along because there's so many super chats. Appreciate that. You guys are being the beloved pay piggies that we appreciate. Evolving Dylan Monkey, $20. I spoke to a charismatic. He said that God sent him a dream about his knee surgery. He looked for a doctor who agreed that he needed knee surgery. However, the surgery didn't work. I asked him how he knew the dream wasn't from the devil, and he didn't say anything. Yeah, it's, that's why in the Orthodox Church we just don't focus and pay attention to this kind of stuff, because everybody in the charismatic world, and the Roman Catholicism, by the way, has accepted charismaticism, holds from the papacy down. it just leads to everybody being deluded, and they follow their dreams and their visions, which, as Jeremiah says, are from their hearts and not from God. So exactly. Any thoughts on dreams and visions? And I mean, I think psychedelics are a big part of pre-list too. Like they give you this, like you think you're seeing these great insights, and it's like, nah, dude. Like the 17-year-old staring at a candy wrapper, realizing that reality is all one, is not some great mystical insight.
Right. No, I agree. I think, just be cautious of dreams. I've seen too many people, even Orthodox Christians, try to make like ultimate conclusions from a dream. Obviously, we know the prophet Daniel was able to interpret dreams. So dreams do have some significance, but who are you? You're not the prophet Daniel. Your ability to interpret the walking dog-headed entity that you encountered you don't know what that means. So just stop.
I think also, like Father Deacon says, like if you were given dreams from God, from the Spirit, or something like that, like you would be interpreting this in the context of your spiritual father, kind of helping you and guiding you, and he's gonna not let you be deluded or fall into some pre-lust. So it would be in the context of the church. It wouldn't be, I don't know, like. I mean, for example, Sam Shamoun's whole ethos is a bunch of dreams and visions and nonsense and orbs flying around his room. All that's pre-list. No one, $5. You should investigate all the people who claim to see visions of Christ and angels during the time of Joseph Smith. This is a very odd part of history. I think in the case of Joseph Smith, number one, he's just a con man. I mean, it's impossible. It's possible that he saw some sort of angelic entity claiming to be Moroni. Or he just understood the power of the con and just claiming to have seen visions. Any comments on Joseph Smith?
No, I totally agree. I mean, Joseph Smith, yeah. I mean, that's a mixture. His dad was deeply interested in the occult. I mean, I would argue Mormonism is the mixture of Western esotericism, Protestant Christianity, and Freemasonry. It's kind of the formation, the foundation of what Mormonism is. So,
Yeah.
Anybody who believes or believes in the revelations of Joseph Smith has problems with their critical reasoning skills.
Exactly. Maximus Pike, £7. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Maximus. Appreciate that. A Panini, £2. Jay, they're euros, not pounds. Excuse me. That's a euro, not a pound. Whatever. That to me, it's all fake. They're all fake unless it's Bitcoin, in my view. Spirit-led Paul, $10. Do you have any thoughts on Zoroastrianism and the claims that it influenced Christianity, or any videos about Orthodoxy debunking this? Well, I'll say that that's something that was very popular in like older 100-year-old scholarship, like late 1800s, early 1900s. I don't know that that's that popular anymore in academia and scholarship. And you'll learn, I think, if you get deep into academic stuff, that a lot of these things are fads, right? So academia has fads. And they'll say things like, oh, early Christianity is influenced from Zoroastrianism, and this is really popular in the year 1900. And then by 1970, nobody believes this anymore. So I don't think that's really happening in academia anymore. But I don't keep up with academia because it's a bunch of nonsense anyway. So any thoughts on Zoroastrianism, Dr. David Patrick Harry?
I mean, outside of it being an early monotheistic faith, no, I've seen the arguments on Zoroastrianism influencing Christianity, but they're very different paradigms. The presuppositions are different. People, I think the word concept fallacy is problematic because maybe there's similar things that are meant, but they're interpreted by those traditions very differently. So outside of Zoroastrianism being a early form of monotheism at a period in which it wasn't prevalent, I think it's historically significant for that. It allowed for a more literate culture in Persia, allowed for a little bit more cultural cohesion compared to the Mithraism of previous times. But no, there's not a huge correlation between. It's the same thing, like you said, with the Zeitgeist. I mean, the whole thing with Christ being another form of Mithra or Apollo or Sol Invictus. I mean, yeah, that was cool in the early 2000s, but that's just not taken seriously anymore.
Let's see, last super chat here that I see, and then we'll get back to some of the books and the text here. Yakubian Yapper type $1. Dr. David Patrick Harry, you should do a drama stream after this. I love the drama streams, by the way. What's the next drama stream?
I don't know. Whenever something I think I get enough interesting news that comes up, but I mean, right now I don't know what the big drama is to do. But yeah, those are fun. I just kind of go
Well,
over
apparently
recent.
the only big drama is that Sidney Sweeney wore blue jeans and referenced genetics, and that's somehow, the Third Reich or something. So that's the
Well, then Arby's just did a commercial, and some juice company just did a commercial, both kind of playing off the same theme. So that is a little cultural drama because we're seeing even major corporations like Arby's, American Eagle, and whatever that smoothie place was that the white guy did. That's all kind of saying the same thing. So it feels like there's kind of a cultural shift in some way that's going on.
Jeff Costas, $5. Yes, I've answered this question many times. Not being a douchebag, it's come up a lot. Have you seen the people that claim that Yahweh was a storm god? Then he became the god of the Bible. Yeah. So basically, there's a great. I don't usually recommend this person, but William Lane Craig does have one good book that's called Creation Ex Nihilo, where he shows that the way that God is presented in just the Torah shows that he is not at all like the surrounding ancient Near Eastern deities that encompass the nation of Israel. And he lists, I think, about 10 different distinctives that set that god off. Furthermore, within the text itself, Baal is a storm god, and that is not Yahweh.
Right.
One reason that very low IQ, low tier people think this is because the word Baal can mean something generic, like just a lord. And so you might call, Jesus Lord. You might call Satan Lord. You might call something, Elohim is another one of these terms that can just be a generic word for a deity. And so very stupid people who don't know about language and how word concept fallacies work, they will think that that word always refers to the same thing. So if you have an Old Testament statement of Lord in one section referring to, Yahweh, in another section where the Lord of the Canaanites, right, Baal or whatever, they'll think it's the same referent. It's just a generic term like Lord. Lord can be, you could call Satan Lord. You could call Jesus Lord. It's a very, very simple grammar mistake. Harvest, $2. Is this a Christian YouTube channel? We're both Orthodox Christians.
Yeah, I think the icons kind of give it away.
Unbound, $5. Jay, thank you for everything. Can you explain the Jay's Analysis membership and what a subscriber gets? It's very simple, very boomer friendly. When you subscribe, you just go to the one single tab called Member tab, and everything is under the Members tab. There's no going all around. You just have one tab where there's the part 1 and the part 2. Very boomer friendly. That's it. You get access to all of the interviews and talks that I've done for the last, I'd say, 10 years. I think Jay's Analysis is about 10 years in terms of the archives.
Wow.
Okay, so we got another super chat. Red Fox, $10. Jay, Dr. DPH, what is the subtle way that spiritual warfare manifests in our culture, and how does Orthodox practices like prayer and fasting equip you to counter the influences? Well, I would just say that, really fasting and that kind of stuff is only a useful tool in terms of helping us to maintain and keep self-control. Fasting itself doesn't we don't pay God with fasting. God doesn't benefit from us not eating. It's really just a way for us to discipline ourselves to attain to and maintain self-control. And the means of grace, like prayer and especially, the Eucharist, that's the way in which we obtain the actual ontological power to not fall prey to the cultural influences, the demonic influences. And that's because we're participating in the uncreated grace and life and love of God through the sacraments and prayer and so forth. So that's what I would say. Kotel, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, basically what you said, I would add that prayer, fasting, the Eucharist, participating in the sacraments, this helps give you spiritual discernment, allows the Holy Spirit to be present within you. If you have more discernment, you're going to be able to navigate, whether it be propaganda, internal thoughts, people you encounter, much easier. So basically what Jay said, the spiritual practices of Orthodoxy allow you to be a carrier of the Holy Spirit and have more discernment regarding the things that are happening. That's how you navigate and defend yourself against it.
Jacob Cabay, $10. I was watching Dr. David Patrick Harry's talks on Saint Paisios and the prophecies. What are your opinions on end times and the prophecies, and could they be used by elites, or are they more guided by God's will? Well, I mean, this is an area that I don't really delve into. I don't know a whole lot about it, so I don't have a positive or a negative opinion. I know that Coattail spent a lot more time in this domain than I have. So I would say that when the end times come, we'll know. I don't think we have to worry too much about it. I'm not saying that people can't study, the prophecies of the elders and whatnot. They absolutely can. That's up to you and what you get into and what you find interesting. It's possible that elites could fake prophecies. There could be forgeries. Any of these things are possible. I don't have any evidence necessarily of that, but it is definitely within the realm of possibility. Are they more guided by God's will? I think holy men absolutely are more guided by God's will. But my take on this would just be that I think that divine revelation as a public binding thing ceased. That doesn't mean that there aren't elders and clairvoyant people in the church, but I don't think you can bind everybody to these private revelations. That's my understanding.
Yeah, I would agree, and also say that I've done a lot of streams regarding looking at some of the eschatological visions of various saints and elders. And if this stuff gives you anxiety, that's not the point. And really, these aren't timelines for history. And as Jay said, these are private revelations among some holy men. Some of them are very insightful and appear based on a third party that they've been fulfilled, that they've come true. But really, if you read this stuff, and St. Paisios included, was that these are just signs to be aware of. St. Paisios was big on the encroachment of technocracy and ecumenism, and that these are signs that every Orthodox Christian needs to be aware of, because they are going to move towards the new Babylonian kingdom, the kingdom of the Antichrist. Does that mean that, something he said in the 1980s, you need to be searching the news every day and concerned and trying to pinpoint, no, spiritual discernment, participating in the sacraments of the church, and then just hearing what the saints and elders have to say and looking for signs when they emerge. That's the point of it.
Let me ask you this, because I overlooked this question. Red Fox originally said the first line in his super chat was, Dr. David Patrick Harry, what are the subtle ways that spiritual warfare manifests in culture that we don't notice?
I would say, obviously, your imagination. That's the one that I talk with guys the most about, is they get weird thoughts. And everybody's had the experience, maybe you're on a tall building and you kind of walk towards the edge and all of a sudden you get a thought to jump, to just kill yourself. We would believe that that's not you thinking, that is a suggestion, that's logismy, that's a suggestion from a demon or the evil one, and that these are the subtleties that are occurring every day. But also those subtleties can emerge through the music you listen to, through propaganda, through if you're believing news or mainstream news. These are another ways in which subtle subversion can take place. And you just have to believe a lie to move in the wrong direction. And that's the whole point of this, of the sort of subtle spiritual warfare. I want to say one last thing on the eschatology thing, is this stuff isn't for everybody. I know people love to hear about end times and the apocalypse. But the whole point is just to get this stuff available with what I work with the Eschaton Vigil in English. A lot of this stuff, almost everything we've translated, has been either in Russian, Serbian, Romanian, or Greek, and they've never been in English. So our goal is just to try to get this stuff in English. And if you're wanting to participate in a community of men that are aware of these things and can interpret them in a way that doesn't cause anxiety and stress, which is absolutely not the purpose of any of it, then you can join the Logos Academy, because the Eschaton Vigil, the founder of that, he's in our group. And if you sign up today, tomorrow the price is going to go up. I told for the first week it was a founding members price. So right now, if you join, your price will be locked in for $25 a month. Again, that includes 3 meetings a month, all the exclusive content, and then the courses that I'm going to build out. So in my estimation, it's a great value compared to what other people are doing with the amount of time that I'm putting in with actual Zoom meetings. Because as Jay knows, those are actually very time intensive, and it takes you away from doing other work. So, but if that's the kind of community you want to be in, where if you have a question, Jacob, on stuff like this, like we actually have guys that are reading this stuff and are not consumed by anxiety about it and can talk to you in a very rational and well-tempered way.
Spirit led Paul $5. Do you have blessings to debate so that I can send crazy people to you? Please do not send crazy people to me. I mean, I don't think that you need a blessing to do a debate. I mean, I think that the more that you move into trying to teach people, spiritual life stuff, and to try to be like a spiritual father or something like that, you need that blessing. But I think everything that we do, people know who our priests are. They know, where we go, what we're up to. You don't have to get your priest's or your bishop's blessing for everything that you do. It really, and also kind of depends on the context of what you're doing it. Like, Dr. Cotel, I keep calling you Dr. David Petricari and I, we both went on whatever and debated kind of crazy feminist chicks. Right. We don't have to call the bishop to, see if we can debate some crazy chick on whatever podcast. But, right. But no, please don't send crazy people my way. Please don't. Tennis racket, $11.41. Guys, thank you for the stream. God bless you both. David, I'm sorry, brother. I wanted to say something hurtful in your stream. You are great. Well, I think we're both men here. I don't think your words are not going to hurt us. We're rubber. You're glue. Whatever you say bounces off us and sticks to you. So our feelings are not hurt. We're big boys. Let me see. Make sure I'm not missing a super chat here. Okay. Let me ask you about the Esalen Institute, because you recommended this book. I have read some of it by Jeffrey Kripal. It is very enlightening. And I think the thing that really first stuck out to me that made me want to get it as I was sort of flipping through it was the chapter Sex with Angels, the Non-Local Mind, UFOs, and the End to Ordinary History, where we talk about this figure of Russell Targ, the CIA psychic spy, who became a mystic. Once I see that, I'm enthralled. Esalen seems to me to be the sort of the boomer think tank that births almost. It's sort of the brains behind the 60s counterculture revolution. And it even gets into this out there sort of alien and CIA stuff. What about Esalen? What about this book? And how does Esalen play into your thesis when it comes to hallucinogens and transhumanism?
So, I mean, Esalen is the foundation of what's called the human potential movement. And whether you're talking about transhumanism or psychedelic mysticism, the human potential movement is essential to both of those. And the belief is that we're capable of way more than we're actually presenting now, and that these are sort of spiritually latent abilities. And so,
by the way, I'm sorry. Let me just make one point. Don't forget this human potential thing, because Jamie asked me about this last night. She said, "Who's Norman Vincent Peale?" People don't know that Norman Vincent Peale is the father of positive thinking, and I'm assuming that also is going to tie into what you're saying with Esalen. And don't forget that positive thinking is also what influenced people like Robert Schuller, the first big megachurch Crystal Cathedral stuff, to take Christianity and turned it into a positive thinking with a cult with a Christian veneer.
And that's the official Christianity according to the White House right now. Was it Paula White?
Oh, is she part of that?
Yeah. So, and that's how she knows Trump, is because Trump was a big Peale fan, and he's all into positive thinking. That's part of his rhetoric, is that he always wants to rhetorically display something in the way in which he wants it to be. He's very convinced that this positive thinking and the law of affirmation and the way the words that
dude, I manifest that stuff. I just manifest it. I want it and I manifest it, bro.
Yeah. Well, and that's why Paula White was his personal pastor. I mean, she's one of these prosperity gospels, but she's all into positive thinking. And that's why Trump latched onto hers, because she basically validated his secular law of attraction into a form of like Protestant Zionist Christianity. So regarding the human potential movement in Esalen, though, Esalen is a fascinating little piece of history that most people, I'd say the average person, has never even heard of. But this was really the think tank. I mean, in 1963, so just, everybody knows the 1960s counterculture, but it's 1963 that Leary gets fired from Harvard because Ram Dass was having a gay relationship with an undergraduate student.
Ram Dass. Ram Dass.
Yeah, exactly. So they get fired from Harvard. So from 60 to 63 is the early Harvard research on psilocybin. 63 is also then when the Esalen Institute begins to have people like Aldous Huxley come and present his sort of perennial philosophy. And so, 67 is the Summer of Love, 69 is Woodstock. And so that gives you a little bit of a time frame. And so through the 60s, the Esalen Institute is where the people of the counterculture, essentially, and Kripal talks about that, it's a who's who. I mean, everybody who goes there basically has a PhD. So this isn't like the average, run-of-the-mill kind of person. This is an institute dedicated to advancing humanity to its like ultimate endpoint and its capabilities. So they're using Gestalt therapy, they're using psychedelics, they're using tantric forms of yoga, anything in regards to the elevation, of personal consciousness is being used there. There's a famous story that you probably read of Hunter Thompson actually being pissed because there's like a natural spa there at Esalen. And even in the early 60s, gay men would go there. And Hunter S. Thompson, who was not a fan of homosexual, he was part of the counterculture. And he was actually hired by Michael Murphy to be the sort of security guard for the premises and allowed him to stay there while he worked on some of the different stuff. He actually went out there to confront 4 gay men who were frolicking with each other in the bath, and actually got beat up by them, and he never returned to Esalen again.
No, I did not know that. Jamie and I took a road trip some years back when we were first dating, and we did drive up Big Sur, and we drove past it, but we didn't go to it.
It's beautiful, the area. I mean, it is gorgeous.
Yeah, Big Sur is awesome.
I mean, you literally look out, there's whales, dolphins. I mean, it is like an ideal scenic
it's perfect,
place. And it's built on the ruins of a Native American I don't know, village.
Well, this becomes, it becomes a hub, right, of the counterculture. You've got Deepak Chopra, you've got like all of these sort of big counterculture figures at some point have gone and done lectures and seminars at Esalen.
Yeah. Abraham Maslow, for his hierarchy of values, again, that was tied with the human potential movement, because they're trying to get what do people need, which then ties with socialist ideas. Well, they need food and shelter, they need education. We need to provide all these things so that each individual.
Well, that was also part of MK Ultra too. Maslow was part of MK Ultra. The human potential movement was studied in MK Ultra too. In fact, they even put that into military studies where they were experimenting on certain troops and certain special operations divisions, where they tried to inculcate them with like extreme forms of positive thinking to see if it could like alter how well they performed in battle.
Yeah. And so the Esalen Institute, to your point, we're talking like a Skinner and his behaviorism. Like, he went there to give lectures. This whole thing was about advancing and acquiring like supernatural abilities. And this gets tied with quantum physics. Russell Targ, he's like a remote viewer, and they have this research. So one of the interesting things about Esalen is that during the Cold War, somehow they had permission by the CIA to be involved with other mystics in Russia. Now, we were told, there was no communication between Russia and America. We're in a
Psi Spies. Mark Hackert has a good essay on Russian psychic spies called Psi Spies.
And there's a whole section in that book talking about how somehow, they were able to take trips, government sanctioned, to Russia, Russians coming to Esalen, and that they performed some remote viewing experiment where one of the mystics in Russia was able to hold some object. It was like a toy elephant or something. And that one of the remote viewers at Esalen could then tap into his awareness, and they accurately described the thing that they were holding. And so Russell Targ is one of these individuals that's really big in promoting remote viewing and access to these supernatural abilities.
Well, this is like verging on like X-Men levels, Stranger Things, Super Kid type stuff, that we're evolving these like latent powers, right?
Yes. Well, Kripal has a famous article talking about superheroes and comics and how this was actually again, that 40s, 50s, 60s culture of science fiction was absolutely influencing what they thought they were doing at the Esalen Institute. And it was literally to create these supernatural humans through psychological process, again, gestalt therapy, different things like that, to raise consciousness.
Whoa, have you seen that Brian De Palma movie called The Fury?
Uh-uh.
You should watch that. We did a psyop cinema. The psyop cinema guys and I, we did an analysis of. We called it MK Kids, which was the idea of like movies that dealt with gifted children evolving to have these sort of X-Men abilities. Three come to mind. One of which is from 1978, and it's like Brian De Palma's version of The Exorcist. But it's actually worth watching because, I mean, there's some crazy like CIA intelligence type stuff in there. Like it begins with Michael Douglas in Israel faking a terror attack on like an Israeli beach from Palestinians. It's very bizarre, and then it turns into this whole big intelligence drama where they're experimenting on his son because his son has these sort of latent telekinesis abilities. So it turns into like a total sort of MK Ultra style thing. There's also the Stephen King Firestarter with Drew Barrymore, which is about children developing these things, being studied by secret government projects, telekinesis and whatnot. And then there is the New Mutants with Anya Taylor-Joy, where it's a backstory to the X-Men, where it's like they're putting these children in this like secret school, which is kind of what Professor X is doing. But in that case, it's more explicitly that trauma-based mind control is believed to spur on and cause these psychic abilities, which is something that does come up in this literature. So I'm not trying to get off into the weeds, but there's actually quite a few movies that touch on this theme.
Right. I mean, we did a whole stream on Project Stargate.
Oh, yeah. Good point. Yeah, exactly. We did. Yeah, everybody should watch that.
A well-documented CIA funding project on, again, really research. We talked about this research coming out of Esalen is what influences in the CIA in the 80s developing Project Stargate, which is ironically the same name of the new AI project that Trump just funded.
Right.
So yeah, there are a lot of interesting connections, and Esalen was essentially the intellectual catalyst for all this stuff. This isn't, I mean, you can go as a regular person, it's very expensive, but as Kripal talks about in that book, I mean, almost if you go in, on a regular day, almost everybody there is an academic or some type of professional. This is a kind of an elite place for elite people that are interested in these projects. And eventually, by the 80s, you get somebody like Terence McKenna who becomes a resident lecturer there. And so, by the 80s and into the 90s, psychedelics being something that can liberate you from the historical constraints of man is part and parcel of the Esalen Institute. And where it connects with transhumanism is by the 90s, Leary has kind of given up on being the psychedelic LSD guru. He writes a book like Your Brain is God, where he's arguing that computers are the new LSD and that transhumanism is the future, and that everything that happened in the 60s and 70s that he was a part of, he's saying is going to be fulfilled through technology and computer and AI.
Did you ever? There's a great documentary that's pretty famous. It's called The Unabomber, The Net, and MK Ultra, something like that. Have you seen that?
Huh.
Oh, you got to see that, because they actually go and interview people at Esalen Institute, and they even get into stuff like the positivists of the Vienna Circle, and how it all ties into LSD and it's a really good documentary. I'll try to dig that up and find it. You should definitely watch. Everybody in the audience should watch that too, and everybody should watch the movies that we just mentioned, including The Fury. They're all very relevant to what we're talking about and demonstrate, I think, that this is all real.
Yeah,
this is not conspiracy stuff. This is actually very legitimately, like, I'm not saying the telekinesis powers are real. I'm just saying that they really do study and are interested in this. And it's infected the society so far as to, like, literally be the origins indirectly of, as he pointed out, the prosperity gospel, all coming out of positive thinking. New Thought, I think, is one of this too. Is a New Thought part of that?
Yep.
Okay. So anything else you want to tell us about this, and then maybe we can tie it into, transhumanism and anything else you want to say about your thesis here, because this is how we got to the modern world.
Yeah, this is how we got to the modern world. And I mean, I don't have much more to say about Esalen. We kind of hit it. I mean, unless you want to get into minutia that maybe some of the people wouldn't be interested in. But generally speaking, I mean, Esalen's just an important spot. I mean, when you start talking about like Alan Watts and his Asian studies, I forget exactly what it was. The American study of Asian culture or something in San Francisco. All this stuff is spawned out of the Esalen Institute, which was closely tied with Stanford University, which Stanford University is closely tied
Remote
with
viewing, SRI.
and this is the conduit of how all this stuff is connected. And when you read the history of Esalen, you see that the government was not interested in shutting all this stuff down. You know, the way that it's presented as the counterculture, right? They're fighting against the man. But even in Kripal's book, which is celebrated by the founder of the Esalen Institute, it clearly shows that the government was
No,
not
that's completely
what
retarded. I hate that narrative so much. It's like the CIA, the foundations, the think tanks, the military, the Pentagon, bankers, they're all putting zillions of dollars into this.
Exactly. And just like you pointed out about MAPS is now the academically respected study of like psychedelics. So if you are an academic, you're going to be affiliated with this group and publish your research in association with them. And again, that is all tied back to the Esalen Institute, which, as you said, is tied with Soros funding and globalist initiatives and all that different stuff, because it's fundamentally perennialist. So the thing about Esalen that they don't accept is if you just say one religion is absolutely true in
the way, the truth, and the life, John 14:6, right? Like,
yeah,
that's the only thing that you can't say.
Kicked out. But if you're interested in perennialism, which is the basis of that entire project, you're warmly welcomed, and they don't care where you come from or what you're into.
I would add too, people overlook that Crowley is also the father of the modern drug counterculture, right? Because Crowley wrote his drug diary way before even Huxley was doing stuff, and Huxley would go they would go to orgies and drug parties together, him and Crowley.
Yeah.
And so Dr. Richard Spence theorizes that Huxley got the idea for drug experimentation, which what would become MK Ultra, through reading Crowley's drug diary. And remember that Crowley was, of course, an asset for British intelligence. So
right.
These things always overlap, and this is decades before the existence of Esalen.
And even tied with that general history is Jack Parsons, who was a member of the Hermetic Golden Dawn with Aleister Crowley. They had a falling out because Parsons was more radical than Crowley was, according to Crowley. And a little tidbit about L. Ron Hubbard, founder of Scientology, is he documented an attempt that Jack Parsons had to give birth to the Antichrist, in which him and
Babylon
Hubbard participated in a sexual ritual with Jack Parsons' girlfriend at the time, which ended with L. Ron Hubbard being ashamed of himself because he's watching Jack Parson masturbate.
Well, also in Craig Heimbigner's book, he even alleges that Parsons was sleeping with his mom because in one of the succubus rituals, he believed that INCEST was required for that.
I wouldn't be surprised. They were into weird stuff.
Red Fox, $10. Jay, do you remember what the military study was called? If you're referring to the one that I mentioned about like black ops and positive thinking, it's from a online book that was published, I think, by an Australian guy. And I did a podcast on this because this is a really obscure, hard to find book. And if you go to my Rockfin, I think it's probably for members too, but it's like Rockfin is something like MK Ultra in Australia, because people don't even know that MK Ultra wasn't just in America and Canada. It was actually at universities all over the world. And I mean, it's a lot. There needs to be like new research done on this, because I didn't even realize that like Carl Jung and Ewan Cameron were at Bergolzi in Switzerland doing experiments, and people don't even talk about or know this. Well,
the Sandoz lab where Albert Hofmann created LSD was also in Switzerland.
Yeah, exactly. And some guy wrote this book. I found it just randomly on like a message board somewhere. I don't even remember the name of it. I'll have to dig it up. But he wrote a book about the history of MK Ultra projects in Australia, basically. So there was all this research that was done, even supposedly that serial killer who was doing sleep studies and basically killed dozens of people at a psychiatric institute. He's the most famous serial killer in Australia, that was actually part of MK Ultra. He was studying putting people to sleep to the point of death and then bringing them back. So like when their heart rate would go all the way down to like death, and then bringing them back to see what he could figure out. I mean, but he was actually just a serial killer. He was getting off on doing it. I forget that guy's name, Dr. Henry something. But that's all. Basically, all of it, of Australia is a bunch of MK Ultra stuff. Is all it is. But I did not remember the name of the book. I'd have to dig it up. But it is in my archive under MK Ultra stuff. You could find it in there. And in that talk, I referenced the book. Random name, $2. Mr. Mythos did an excellent video on Stargate. I don't know Mr. Mythos, but I will say that Dr. David Patrick Harry and I did a really good talk on Stargate. So I would say check out ours. I don't know this other dude. A Panini, €2. What is your SBD? What does that stand for? We don't know what that means. Death Culture, $10. What do you guys take on intentional communities? What are your thoughts? If you have any, it would be good to develop social capital for Orthodox. This does exist to a degree amongst Orthodox. There are people who are, I don't want to say experimenting, but attempting to create Orthodox-only communities sort of outside of town. And I think that that's probably a wise approach in terms of this country sort of going downhill. I don't think that would be a problem. But I think when you talk about intentional communities with like yoga chicks and, man bun dudes doing, meditation, that's probably not going to work out too well. So what do you think about intentional communities?
I think long term, it's probably a good idea. We talk about this in some of our group meetings about, in an ideal world, it'd be nice if there were hubs of Orthodoxy all across the United States that theoretically Orthodox Christians could travel and stop from community to community. Obviously, there's one kind of already growing and exists outside St. Anthony's in Arizona. I mean, they basically have their own neighborhood. So I think if people were able to actually organize, that's the difficult part. I think first we need to begin with some type of document that can demonstrate all the Orthodox business owners. So if you live in upstate New York and there's an Orthodox guy that follows Jay and he's a plumber, go hire him. We need to create some type of economic incentive, first of all, which we're so disconnected and we're so small in the United States, it's kind of hard. But, one of the ideas I had in a place like Mississippi, there's like old towns that have like 100 to 200 people that used to be thousands of people live there. And so they have like a infrastructure, old, kind of decrepit. But theoretically, imagine like 100 Orthodox families move into a town that has infrastructure like that and begins to rejuvenate it. And then we can elect our own mayor and we could kind of build our own local government with something that already exists. But again, making that happen logistically is just pretty difficult. But if you know people that are interested and have the same values, yeah, absolutely. We need more of community, and we need places where people can actually have reassurance with each other and their neighbor.
Big Iron, $5. Jay, Dr. David Patrick Harry, there's a narrative that early Christians use psychedelics. I doubt it was ever accepted. Do you think this is credible? Well, you must have missed the first hour because we covered all that in the first hour, and no, we don't believe that. A Panini says SBD means squat, bench, deadlift. So, Dr. David, what is your SBD? Silent but deadly.
I don't do any maxing right now, so everything I'm doing is like 8 to 15 reps. So squats, couple 45s on each side, same with bench, and probably three plates and a 25 on deadlift, stuff like that. But I'm not a power lifter, so I really don't do any maxing out and try to find the max amount of weight I can lift.
Yeah. Also, I would say, this is just my opinion, but there are some issues. Like, for example, Rocor has had some issues with the monasteries in Arizona, and when laity go for confession or they go to the monasteries thinking that they're being like super pious, and then they get advice that monastics give to other monastics. There have been multiple problems with this.
Yes. I
So
talked
it
with
may
a
not
guy
be
who
the
had
best idea to try, if you're going to set up an intentional community, to necessarily think that we have to move next to a monastery. And I mean, I'm not saying you can't, but I'm just saying that may not be like the ideal situation.
yeah.
But that's because I'm in ROCOR and there's certain issues with that. Bon Jovi, 1912, $50 and says nothing. So thank you so much. Appreciate that. Sir Jeff Costas, I'm sorry about the Yahweh storm god question. You don't have to apologize. That's just a question that we have answered that. I appreciate you answering it in different ways, detailed ways. Keep up the good work. Yeah, I would just say read Creation Ex Nihilo by William Lane Craig, even though I don't typically recommend William Lane Craig. But okay, so guys, I want to remind you too that we do have a show sponsor, which is chalk.com, CHOQ.com, the best in supplementation. You've got ashwagandha for mental focus. You've got the Tonkat Ali for boosting testosterone. You've got the Chad mode for pre-workout. All those great products over at chalk.com, CHOQ.com. Also want to remind you guys that next up, I'm halfway through Saifedean Ammos's excellent book, The Bitcoin Standard. The first half of the book covers the history of money. I didn't even realize that you're basically getting an entire history lesson on money. Of course, he is coming from the Austrian School of Economics, largely, which is, I would say, about 80 to 90% correct. I have some reservations about Austrian economics, but overall, it's definitely way better than socialist or Keynesian economics, of which the first half is a great critique. The second half then gets into the value proposition for Bitcoin as a currency. So we're going to be covering that next. Maybe tomorrow. We'll see when I'm ready to do part one. So be sure and come on over and listen to our defense of Bitcoin. I'm going to be dealing with all the objections. I've heard them all a million times for the last 9 years. I'm sure all of you in the audience are going to have all the same flood objections. So go ahead and bring it. I'm ready. Let's get into Saifedean's book. And then, of course, we have Dr. David Patrick Harry's channel is linked. Be sure and follow him. And he is in the show description, and his Logos Academy. Do you have any other issues, any other things on your mind that you want to get to? By the way, I want to remind everybody, the last time that Kotel and I did a stream, it was one of my favorites because he brought me on to talk about British intelligence and Islam. I love talking about espionage and spy stuff, probably more than anything else. Well, I said that it's equal up there with, I mean, obviously I talk about theology, but I'm saying, like, other than the theological stuff, I like to talk about the spy stuff, and I like to do the comedic stuff. So that's up there. So be sure and check out our stream on British intelligence and Islam. That was a fascinating topic. Kotel, what is on your mind? What are you doing next? What should we be looking for?
I mean, the big thing that I'm doing next is, as I mentioned earlier, is trying to get this dissertation published. And so some of the stuff, as I kind of gave an overview, I don't want to repeat myself, but if you're interested in a detailed, and then again, this is very academic take on comparing Orthodox deification, theosis, and how this has kind of been bastardized, and how we got to a point in which transhumanism is actually competing with other Christian sentiments. And so there is like the Christian Transhumanist Association. It's actually, I think, headquartered in Tennessee, maybe around Nashville.
I didn't even know that. So that's in our neighborhood.
Yeah. It's it's not really super influential, but they are very outspoken, and they try to incorporate like Saint Maximus the Confessor and Orthodox saints as like, oh, look, again, they're not Orthodox. It's a very progressive form of Christianity. It's non-denominational, but they are constantly appealing to Orthodox theosis as being the continuity and strand that transhumanism is emerging from. And so the dissertation, like if you're interested in theories of mind, we're talking about functionalism and what is the metaphysics of a transhumanist paradigm, and these various groups that are explicitly religious in their transhumanism. You know, there's the Alcor Life Extension Center in Scottsdale, Arizona. This is where they're doing cryonic freezing and stuff like that. And the head philosopher of transhumanism is Max Moore. He's an atheist guy who actually has an article that I quote in the dissertation called "In Praise of the Devil," where he appeals to Satan. He argues not a ontologically real figure, but a perfect archetype to rebel against this constraining system of Christian morality and Christian, it's almost like a Nietzschean thing, like the Christian slave morality, so that transhumanism can actually elevate us to the promise that Lucifer, the true inspiration of human liberation can move us towards. And so that dissertation, like I said, it's going to be a book titled "Return to Babylon: From Adam to Antichrist" is the kind of working title that I got. I'm trying to come up with a book cover right now, and so we haven't fully landed on one that's perfect. But the general theme I was thinking, and anybody has advice, feel free to reach out to me, was something like an apocalyptic dystopian wasteland where a Darwinian evolution of man actually begins with like fallen Adam and leads to the transhumanist Antichrist. And behind them is like an Orthodox Byzantine church or something. And it's not affected by the detritus and all the debris of the dystopian scene behind it. Because there's not really, again, the academic title is so long and verbose that it's not catchy. So I came up with Return to Babylon: From Adam to Antichrist. And I hope that something of that theme, again, we haven't landed on something perfect. I've been trying to use AI and stuff to get a template. And then my thumbnail guy was going to help actually create the actual book cover, so it's not just AI generated. But I hope, as I said, to have that out by August. And so I launched the Logos Academy. That was the big one after the Whatever podcast. I was trying to launch the community, get all the content up there. Again, if you join today, it's the last day to get the founding member price, which is just $25. And if you purchase for the full year, it's $250. So you get 2 months free and you get a free week. So if you sign up, you automatically get a free week trial. So if you get on there and you like,
you get free weed.
Yeah, free weed.
It sounded like free week. That was a joke.
Free week. Yeah. So you get on there and you're like, yeah, this DPH is full of shit. He doesn't, okay, you can leave and not spend any of your money. I would assume if you spend your time and you actually engage with the guys in the community, you're going to appreciate it and find it worth your value. I mean, my goal is once we have 3-4 courses, the price to be a member is going to continually to go up. So if that's something you're interested in, and so, as I said, trying to get some ebooks out. So by the end of the year, my goal is to have one academic book, which I know is not going to be a popular seller. A couple general books for regular people tied with courses on the academy. But then I was speaking with, and I mentioned, and actually Rachel thought this was a great idea, is I was thinking about writing a book for an 18-year-old male. Because you look at like Rollo Tomas, he's got the Rational Male, or a lot of the people in the manosphere are these online content. I think Ruslan has his own book. They're very general books for the average reader.
Yeah.
And so everything that I've written is not for the average reader, and it's not going to be popular. It's very academic. So I thought for something more popular oriented, is I was going to write a book called The Crisis of Man. And I want to start on this by the end of the year and basically bring an 18-year-old male who knows nothing up to speed on the state of the world. So central banking, Federal Reserve, fiat currency, the meaning crisis, the death of God, the history of philosophy, how we get to the postmodern turn, the death of masculinity, the destruction of nuclear families, all this different stuff that we're dealing with in culture. And write it not so much for somebody who has a background knowledge in this stuff, but assuming an 18-year-old guy knows absolutely nothing, to have like 150, 175 page book that kind of brings them up to speed. And then the conclusion is orthodoxy, but it's not going to be marketed as an orthodox book. It's just going to demonstrate everything that we're dealing with, again, the crisis of man, and why orthodoxy is the ultimate solution. So my goal is that will be a general reader physical copy book, and I hope to have that done by like next summer. So that's kind of the big things on the agenda, and of course creating streams. So Church of Eternal Logos, that's always going to kind of be the same thing. And then I have an old YouTube channel that we mentioned, the one on psychedelics, that I've kind of rebranded as Dr. David Patrick Harry. And I think that's going to be more of like whatever's the popular topic people are talking about, do like video reviews. I mean, you look at like the Daily Wire's level of content. It's really just commentary on things that people are doing.
I watched like 1 hour of Ben Shapiro, and I was like, just because I've never watched it. And it's like basically he just watches a clip and then tells you what was in the clip that you just watched. And I'm like, well, why are people paying for this? I don't understand.
Literally.
Like, what's the value in this? This is so lame. Go ahead.
Basically the Daily Wire.
Yeah. P-Man, $2. Is there an Elamite, Islamistan, Mason, Persian CIA connection? I don't know. It's a lot of things strung together. I think the CIA definitely has an interest in Shia Islam and Iran, and in that sense, Persia. I don't know about all that other stuff though. V Scott, $2. Is the site something that women can eventually join, or only men?
It's only for men right now. So last night we had our first group meeting, and it was overwhelmingly supported by all the men that no women can join our meetings. It's just an all male space. It's for male formation, and we got guys that are very successful, like mature men. And so the goal is to get young guys, established men together, and then talk about and learn about a variety of different things. So no women are allowed. Unfortunately, I'm sure there's women only spaces, but the Logos Academy.
It's a black woman only space over here on my channel. So all of you ladies, especially black ladies, you're all welcome over here on my channel. Even though Kotel doesn't want you, I do. Right? I'm like Lady Liberty over here. I got that torch. Bring me all of your sullen masses and your black ladies over here on my channel. I'm just kidding. You look mad. Is that making you mad? So, you look like you're mad. We've been making jokes on my channel for a while now that like there's only like 9% female audience of my channel in terms of the demographics. But I keep seeing like black people popping up in the comments, so I'm thinking like maybe I just have like 9% black girl audience. No, but I'm just joking. I'm just joking. You know, I think we need more all male spaces. It doesn't even exist anymore.
No.
And that like feminists will like sue you if you try to create that kind of stuff on a big scale. Like if you try to create a business, you know, like a cigar bar that's only for, you know, guys, and then you'll get feminists that will sue you. It's just insane. V Scott says $2. It's totally fine. That's why I asked. Yeah, I think probably most of the women in our audience wouldn't care. I'm just making jokes. I'm being silly. All right. Well, hey, man, thank you. Great interview. Love to hear things are going well for you. Congratulations on finishing the degree. I know there was a lot of work. Really proud of you.
I appreciate that. You know, and I would love to, once I get it formatted, send you a copy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll read it, and you come on and we'll do an interview.
Yeah, I'd love that. I'd love that.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. If you would hit like, share, comment below, and subscribe, and everybody have a good evening.
God bless.
Hey, thanks, man. Really good chat.
Hey, thank you, brother. I appreciate that, especially the opportunity just to expose it to people. So thank you, man.